Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the HELCOM Stakeholder Conference 2025. My name is Sandra Kropa, and it is my pleasure to be today the moderator of today's event. And I am an environmental journalist with a passion on Baltic Sea already more than 10 years. And this is why I'm very thankful to HELCOM to have opportunity to be with you in such an event today. As you all know that this year, the focus of the conference is on pollution issues, and more precisely, we will talk about hazardous substances. And today we will talk a lot about how we can make Baltic Sea unaffected by these substances. And this is why first, of course, we need to raise awareness of this problem, and to tackle this problem better and more effectively, we need input also from you stakeholders. And this is why we are all here today. And I would say that the key word of today's presentations and discussions will be the One Baltic approach. And more about this new holistic approach to manage these issues in Baltic Sea, we will also talk in the coming hours. What we can expect today, we will have 2 sessions before lunch break, and in these 2 sessions we'll more focus on review the current state and the latest developments regarding hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea. At 12, we will have lunch break, 1 hour long. And at 1, I really hope to see you all back here. And we will come back with a more interactive session where we will maybe focus more on questions, what can we jointly do to achieve a healthy Baltic Sea? Also, after that, in afternoon, we will have short coffee break. And then we aim to finish all the discussions at 4 o'clock Helsinki time, and to achieve that we'll really be keeping very strictly on schedule, and I'll do the best I can do to help you with this. Also, I need to admit that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be shown on YouTube channel, and after this conference you will receive a link to this recording in a coming next few days. Also about questions and answers, how we will give you answers to your questions and comments. For this, you will need just to use the tool which is here on Teams, the question and answers section. And after each session, we will address these questions to speakers. But of course, you can type your questions during each presentation, and we'll come up with them a little bit later. Also, we will have short group discussions at the end of this day, and you can also use a lot of your questions there. But if you do some social media reporting and if you are very active in social network, then please use hashtag of the conference, which you can see right now on the screen, which is HSC 2025. And also I want to thank Emperest Project, who provided support in organizing this conference. And of course, now I think we can start it and officially open it. And for this, I would like to welcome here Executive Secretary of HELCOM, Rüdiger Strempel, providing his opening remarks. So good morning, Rüdiger. I hope you hear us, and please open this event.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Good morning to you and good morning to everybody, and welcome to this year's edition of the HELCOM Stakeholder Conference, dedicated, as Sandra said, to hazardous substances. Now, one could say that combating hazardous substances is part of our HELCOM DNA. It's enshrined in our convention in Article 5, referring to the elimination of pollution by harmful substances, and a related Annex 1. We have a definition, actually, of what hazardous substances are in Article 2, Paragraph 8, which says any harmful substance which, due to its intrinsic properties, is persistent, toxic, or liable to bioaccumulate. We have our 2021 Baltic Sea Action Plan, which has dedicated an entire thematic segment to hazardous substances and litter, formulating the goal of a Baltic Sea unaffected by hazardous substances and litter, and underpinned by a management objective saying we want to minimize the input and impact of hazardous substances from human activities. This thematic segment contains 30 actions addressing hazardous substances, legacy pollutants, and contaminants of emerging concern. So yes, hazardous substances have long been on the agenda of HELCOM, and yet we may have underestimated the magnitude of the problem, because as HOLAS 3 has shown that while eutrophication has long been considered the most pressing, the most significant threat affecting the Baltic Sea, and it is a pressing and significant threat, we now have to acknowledge that, in fact, the danger from hazardous substances is even more severe and is even more pressing. And this, of course, is due to the fact that a broad range of hazardous substances continues to enter the Baltic Sea via a variety of pathways, while legacy pollutants, unfortunately, don't just go away, and new substances of concern are emerging. And let me recall to you that across Europe, more than 100,000 chemicals are commercially available, but most are insufficiently monitored in the environment, and many are insufficiently restricted as well. So all of this means that we have to redouble our efforts in this domain as in many others. Stricter EU legislation, there's no denying that, has of course improved the situation, but many compounds continue to pose a threat to the Baltic Sea environment and other environments, of course. So we feel this is a very timely event, and we're happy that you turned out in force, as we need broad buy-in and support as we work to finalize our regional action plan on hazardous substances this year, and to apply a new strategic and holistic framework to managing hazardous substances in the One Baltic approach. The new strategic framework and new HELCOM recommendations on lists of priority substances and sources of release and uncertainties to address have actually just been adopted, I'm happy to say, and were published today, along with a related website that was launched today. So, as HOLAS 3 also clearly shows, we need transformative action across all regions of the Baltic and across all sectors of societies. And in other words, that means our success depends on your input. Our approach needs to be inclusive as well as holistic. And that's why I thank you for being here today, for having turned out in force, as I said, for supporting our endeavor. I wish you an inspiring and fruitful conference and look forward to the outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rüdiger. And really, I hope that we will have a very fruitful conference today, and also our program says that it will be so. And next, let me invite Johan Näslund to say as well a few words. Johan is an expert of hazardous substances from Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, and he is currently co-chairing the HELCOM expert group on hazardous substances. So please, Johan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good morning to you all. Myself from Sweden, and also I would like to say that Berit Brockmeyer from Germany is also co-chairing the HELCOM expert group with me, with excellent support from the Secretariat. So I would first like to thank everyone that has contributed to all this strategic work on hazardous substances that has been done since the Baltic Sea Action Plan was updated in 2021, and also for the Secretariat for organizing today's event. I think it's very exciting to see the great interest on this important topic, which I am thinking about and working with more or less every day of my life. And I do not want to take up more time than necessary, as I'm sure ample time will be needed for today's discussions. So I would just like to say a warm welcome from me as well to a day full of collective learning and also fruitful discussions. And please listen to each other's thoughts and keep a curious mindset throughout the day, and we will have a good time together. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. And yeah, I also want to wish all to listen to each other, and I'm really sure today we'll have a lot of interesting ideas to share. And before we start our session, let's see who we are here. And when you were registering to this conference, of course, we saw as well the organization type you're representing and also countries you come from. And what we can see that, of course, the biggest part of today's conference participants come from government agencies, and then we have quite a lot of people coming from universities or research institutions, and then a bit less governmental organizations, even less international or intergovernmental organizations. Also, we can see the private sector representing us here today. It's very, very nice to have you here. And also local authorities and municipality level. From countries, we can see the biggest part of participants come from Finland, and then big part from Germany and Sweden. Also Poland is very close, and then less participants come from Denmark, Estonia, EU countries in general, Lithuania, Latvia, and other countries outside the EU. So it is very nice to have you here and to have really such a diverse group of participants here. And let's start today our first session. The first session will be about where do we stand now? Let's see where we are now with the hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea. And in this session, we will have two presentations. The first will be from Owen Rowe from HELCOM Secretariat. Owen manages the HELCOM Holistic Assessment and is a former researcher who has been working with the HELCOM regional indicators and also assessments for the past 8 years. And he will provide us an overview of the current status of hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea. And before Owen starts, I will just remind that for questions and answers, you can use the question and answer tool what we have here, but all the questions will be asked after the second presentation of this session. So, Owen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. I just put this into full screen mode. Okay, yes, so as Sandra said, I will try and give you a brief introduction to the background related to hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea. And hopefully we'll set the scene for the more detailed work that my colleagues and other people will introduce later on. So HELCOM carries out holistic assessments on an approximately a 6-year cycle. So in 2018, there was the second holistic assessment, or HOLAS-2, that covered the data period from 2011 to 2016. And then more recently, we have the HOLAS-3 report, which was published in 2023. And this then looks at the data from the period of 2016 to 2020-21. And this is then the report which I will focus most of the rest of the presentation on, as it's the most current information that we have related to hazardous substances. There's obviously then another report due, so we're currently planning towards that, and that will come in sort of 2028 and 2029, where there will be the HOLAS-4 report as well. So in HOLAS-3, we applied a conceptual management framework. So this then looks at different components within a cycle, including drivers, activities, pressures, state, impact, and then measures. So we can directly look at some of the information within these in more detail. For instance, if we understand the activities and the pressures, we can understand the direct links to state, and then what impact that has on the environment. And understanding these in greater detail, including having data behind them, can make us understand better how to place measures, what's the most optimal measures, and where to place those measures. The overall structure of HOLAS-3, it has covering all the different topics. We have around 2 million data points or more. We have that data enters the indicators and other assessment elements. We have 59 indicators. Then these are addressed under different topics into thematic assessments, and we have 5 different reports, including one that focuses on hazardous substances. And then above that, we bring all of this information together into a summary report. And this is a huge process that takes planning of 6 years and the focused work for 2 to 3 years. And it's also the work of around 1,000 regional experts from all of the Baltic countries, bringing together this information in a regional and harmonized way. And for hazardous substances specifically, there's thousands of data points and around 15 indicators that we focus on. So these are the 15 indicators that we have for hazardous substances. There's a wide range of different aspects covered here, but we also cover then some important groups. For instance, we cover metals. We touch on pharmaceuticals with this diclofenac indicator. We also look at some aromatic compounds and some non-aromatic compounds. We have an indicator that explores radioactive substances, and then also an indicator that looks at oil spills in the environment. And then associated with these, we also have 3 indicators that focus more on the effects on biota. So then bringing together how some of these compounds catalyze change within the communities that we have in the Baltic Sea. The indicators themselves are assessed using an international assessment tool that's been developed in collaboration with OSPAR and AMAP, so the Arctic Monitoring Programme, and the OSPAR Commission. And this then facilitates the use of the data that we gather regionally to analyse these and compare them to threshold values. And in this sense, we have a relatively simple threshold values, quite common for hazardous substances, where if the concentration exceeds a certain concentration, we fail to achieve the assessments, and if it's lower than the concentrations for that threshold value, then we achieve. And you can see these examples where we have these regional assessments carried out per indicator, where HBCDD generally achieves the concentrations, whereas something like mercury doesn't achieve the threshold values, and poor status is spread widely across the Baltic Sea. We also then try and integrate these indicators. So this integrated assessment then brings together the substances, the concentrations that we analyze in the individual indicators, brings those together, and we can then understand how far we are from achieving good status. So the deeper the red color, the worse the status. And some sort of take-home messages from the most recent assessment here is that we have quite high confidence, so good data backing up most of the areas where we do the assessments. But we also know that it's very clear then that status is generally not achieved in any area across the region. And in many cases, we have these deeper red colours, with most assessments, with most assessed areas falling then within the bad and poor, so the worst two categories of our assessment. It's also important, though, to note that not every substance that we monitor here contributes to poor status. So some of these substances do achieve their threshold values, and then they're not the major drivers of the overall assessment. But we can also see here some of the substances, for instance, copper and mercury and PBDEs and TBT. These are contributing quite strongly to and then drive the status of the overall assessment being below standard. There's some good news as well, and it's important to note this, that measures do work and can work when they're implemented. And you can see here then the areas in the areas of the charts which are blue. This indicates that for these substances, the number of stations are showing trends where there's a downward trend. So the concentrations are decreasing, and we're seeing improvements in the environment. And you can see that these blue areas of the bar charts, they outweigh the areas which are red. And these are where we're having increasing trends or a deteriorating status being detected. So overall, the measures are effective when they're applied, and we can see the fact that there is improvements happening in the environment. But it's also important then to put this into a bigger picture. And we also see then from the last holistic assessment that we have a large number of pressures, including in this list non-indigenous species or physical disturbance or extraction of fish and underwater noise. But then the top two are eutrophication and hazardous substances. So hazardous substances in the latest report is indicated to be the most impactful pressure on the Baltic Sea ecosystem. And then another example that we have here is from the HOLOS 3 report, where there was a target and non-target screening carried out. And in this assessment, we have 100 samples covering the entire Baltic Sea region. There's around 90,000 substances that are examined, and there's around 100 of those substances that turn out to be something that should be followed up on in the future. And with that, I would just like to say this is a lot of work from our indicator leads and EG HAS and EG MORS and EG Surveillance, and I will say thank you.
Thank you, Owen. And yes, we can see each other. Thank you for this presentation. From one side, really optimistic view when you see that measures can work. From other side, pessimistic when we see a lot of these deep red colors still on the map of Baltic Sea. But I hope with all the measures and also ideas that need to be done in the nearest future, we'll have this map in a future as well, maybe less red and maybe even greener. So, but we really will talk in detail about all these current issues in the next presentation as well, and also in the coming presentations later on. Now I would like to invite Lotta Ruokanen and Vassilios Koudouloumpous to also give a next presentation in this session. and they are from HELCOM Secretariat. Lotte is the Deputy Executive Secretary at the HELCOM Secretariat, responsible for the HELCOM Working Group on Source-to-Sea Management of Nutrients and Hazardous Substances and Sustainable Agricultural Practices, and also related expert groups and projects. And Vasilios is a project researcher in several of the key HELCOM projects on hazardous substances, and their presentation will focus on One Baltic approach, this new strategic holistic approach for hazardous substances management in the Baltic Sea. For the coming minutes, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and good morning to everybody. So now we give you a brief overview of what have been developed over the past couple of years within the expert groups and working group and several projects that have contributed to this work. Next slide, please. So on the build-up to the revision of the Baltic Sea Action Plan in 2021, there was a big background work done on analyzing what is or was the framework for managing hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea region by HELCOM. And as mentioned by Owen, we aim to follow the management cycle that is here in the picture to the left, so that we would take into account drivers in the society, activities, human activities that cause pressures that then deteriorate the state of the marine environment, have an impact, and then we aim to have measures to actually address those activities and pressures, for example. But to the right, you can see what was the status of the framework, or there wasn't actually a framework. There were several separate processes, and you can see that some of them, most of them actually addressed pressures. So we had, for example, collaboration, and we still have with EMAP on airborne inputs of some selected hazardous substances, as well as PLC project pollution load compilations. Then holistic assessments a bit analyzed their drivers, but especially state and impact. And then we have had some measures already earlier, but they were kind of detached from these previous parts of the management cycle. So there was no proper linking between these steps. It was not holistic, and actually there was no added value and synergy with some other existing policies to be found in this previous work. And the background report is on the HELCOM website, where it can be found. There's the link in the slide. Next one, please. So then the 2021 Baltic Sea Action Plan that was also referred to by Rüdiger Strempel, we have it built in a way that it would support the management cycle. If you click once more. So we aim to address the human activities that result in these pressures, so that we would have a better state of the biodiversity and ecosystem health. And as mentioned, we have the segment for hazardous substances and litter with 30 actions addressing hazardous substances. Next one, please. And the key action here is called HL1 or coded. It's mentioned in green in the middle. So it is to develop a regional strategic approach, and on basis of that approach, an action plan on HELCOM work for hazardous substances. We also had an old recommendation that is mentioned here on the top, recommendation 31E-1, on priority substances, but there was no systematic mechanism on how to actually maintain and update that list. And it was also found out that we really need to clarify our regional role compared to some other policies, for example, both regional, but then also EU-wide or global ones. We had a very limited number of priority contaminants, and all the measures were compiled on ad hoc basis. Now that we have HL1 and we have developed this new regional strategic approach, we also have addressed some other actions in the Baltic Sea Action Plan, and they are also mentioned here in green in the bottom. So HL10 on actually establishing a mechanism for managing these priority substances, HL9 on establishing procedures to utilize information obtained under other policies, and then also HL11 to organize continuous follow-up on these other policies and how to also influence them from our regional perspective. Next one, please. So the vision for the new framework was established in very early phases of the process. already over 2 years ago. And now we aim to have this holistic approach so that we have a situation assessment of both the state of the environment and the activities and pressures. And then we use this information to actually prepare for possible response, prioritizing both impacts and substances, their sources and possible pathways, and then the existing measures. Of course, we will have a lot of uncertainties to address, and we also need to prioritize those so that we are able to actually have possible response strategies and practices selected based on the information gathered and also on the based on the uncertainties and gaps that we have. And then built on this, we can then plan and adopt new measures and implement them, both to improve and protect the state of the marine environment, for example, reducing inputs of hazardous substances, or to improve assessments, meaning that we address the uncertainties and gaps, and then on the next round of the assessment cycle, we can have better information what is actually happening there in the environment. Yes, the next one, please. So we have now run this framework once, the primary run, as we call it, and we already see that that's our aims. We are going towards our aims, and they are listed again here. So a better understanding of the overall state of the sea and the marine environment in regard to these hazardous substances and pollution, to define possible major pollutants, their sources and pathways, and the threats that they cause to the environment, and what are the key information gaps. And then especially focus today is the actions, because not only we have the 2021 Baltic Sea Action Plan, but we also need to draft this new regional action plan and new actions so that we both improve our understanding and also have the better situation view. All this leads also to better coordination and support towards implementing other policies. Some EU policies are mentioned here, national policies, and then also, of course, like global processes. And the next one. Here I give floor to my colleague Vasilis, please.
Thank you, Lotta. So I'm Vasilis Koulimbos, and I will continue the description of Lotta on the new strategic approach developed, getting now to the practical scheme. So the vision that you saw before in Lotta's slide was converted to a scheme about how it can be implemented in practice. So in each cycle, the idea is that a so-called master table, we will see soon what this is exactly, how it looks, is filled with substances of concern for the Baltic Sea. The second step, this table is extended with some additional information for at least some of the entries. And at step 3, all this table is translated into 3 priority lists, so substances or groups, sources, and uncertainties, which provide essentially 3 different perspectives to support management decisions at step 4. So let's see how it works. This is how pretty much the master table looks like. The concept is that for filling this table, so for identifying the substances of concern, we run 3 independent assessments. One looking at the marine environment and what substances are detected there and at which level. The second assessment is looking at the input, so what's coming to the Baltic Sea, riverine inputs, etc., but includes other aspects. We will see again in the next slide more details what we mean by inputs here, and also indirect evidence such as biological effects or expected increased inputs in the near future. So the idea basically is that none of those assessments would be adequate by itself to provide a holistic assessment. For instance, if we only looked at the substances found in the marine environment, we would be biased towards what is monitored. But in combination, they provide a truly holistic assessment with a lot of potential to identify what substances matter the most for the Baltic Sea. So as soon as substances fulfill some criteria for any of those assessments to enter the table, they are also scored, depending on how much they fulfill their respective criteria. And also, for those substances or groups, their respective hazardous properties are scored as well. At the next step, step 2, so at least for top-ranked substances, further information is gathered to support the next steps. So what this is about the regulatory status, predominant sources and sectors where they are emitted from, and areas in the Baltic Sea where the status is poor. So also horizontal issues identified, for instance, uncertainties which are common between substances or sources which are common again. Why? In order to support filling those three priority lists, the two latter of which reflect other horizontal issues. And then the idea in step 4 is for some of those priority issues, some means those for which we can see that there's space for actions of added value to existing measures, then it's possible that regional actions are adopted. Always, of course, in synergy with the existing policies, as also Lotta mentioned. As a colleague at the expert group on hazardous substances at HELCOM said, the devil is in the details. So in order to be operational and effective, we needed also to describe the mechanism for running this framework as detailed as possible. So some most important aspects will be highlighted here. So for instance, for a substance to enter the master table based on the status about its presence in the marine environment, we look at the marine levels. This could be monitoring, could be also non-target screening, which, as Owen mentioned in his presentation, could theoretically at least cover up to hundreds of thousands of different chemicals, even though with less accuracy, of course. So we check different matrices in the marine environment and compare with the threshold values. Again, so sources can be national, international databases, projects that were run, HOLAS indicators, of course, always, and even scientific articles, etc. We had to set minimum criteria, and these are typically expressed about how many or how much percent of the assessment units for which there is data seem to exceed the levels in certain percent of the samples. And we also translate this into a score. An important aspect here is that substances vary a lot in terms of the information available. So for substances with a few data points and unreliable thresholds, etc., usually the range of score will be broader. We talked about inputs. So the idea here is that we can use both quantitative measurements in the various pathways to the Baltic Sea. Of course, in an ideal world, it would be great if we could have quantitative estimations about what comes in terms of a substance to the Baltic Sea from riverine inputs, from atmospheric deposition, direct land-based emissions, or direct offshore emissions from shipping, for instance. But this is not always the case. So we have, of course, to also make use of market information or information about releases from uses upstream on the pathways. But in any case, so whatever information is available, we can reflect in, again, either narrow or broad range, depends on how representative the information is. And here, in order to translate this into a score about how likely significant those inputs will be, there are two ways, either to take into account the persistence and bioaccumulation and toxicity properties. This will tell us how likely is that certain tons or kilos of a substance will create problems in the level when steady state will be reached in the marine environment. Of course, if resources are available and a model can be used, of course, we can use a more complex model to predict what will be the marine levels if such inputs continue. And surprisingly, during the first primary run, although we didn't have a lot of time in our available, we succeeded to collect information about quantitative information about more than 600 substances. Here you see some examples of the data sources used, some generated by other legislation, such as river basin specific pollutants, for example, from the Water Framework Directive, the former EPRTR register, etc. Now to analogous concerns, by looking at the presence and input evidence, we may still miss some subsets of concern. So other types of evidence relevant have been listed by EGHAS. Here you see some examples. One of them is a manifested biological effect that can provide information on mixture effects, and evidence can either be expressed in limited case as specific substance that we know that trigger the effect, or otherwise as modes of action. So quite broad entries which can also fill the master table. My colleague Gaston will talk in more detail later today about biological effects and how they are used. It was important also to define very well the priority list and what they aim, to avoid difficult discussions and be able to focus on the specificities of the substance when policy decisions are made about what to list in priority lists. For instance, the list of priority substances was defined substances or groups with the highest anticipated risk for the Baltic Sea and ecosystem services. Actually, what this meant is that the regulatory status is not really taken into account when filling this list, but it is rather taken into account when adopting measures. Also, the regulatory status of a substance can determine how much effort to spend on gathering more information, also can affect the number of substances in the priority list. If many of the highest risk are well regulated and there's not much space for additional measures, of course, it could be worth listing more substances in the priority lists. Grouping, very important aspect as well. And in terms of uncertainties, if you have ranges, how do you rank the substances? Then the approach taken there is that we can run different scenarios, best case, worst case scenarios. And again, it's a policy decision on which scenario to base the ranking. In the primary run of the approach, what we did is that to base this on the so-called reasonable best case scenario, meaning for substances for which we had a bit unreliable thresholds or unreliable quantification about the marine levels, we assumed what if the threshold was a bit higher or the concentration was a bit lower to avoid false positives, essentially. Finally, the last, some details about the last step, step 4, which is about adoption of measures. So some concepts described in the approach include the fact that you need to analyze existing measures and why they have not worked so far, because of course, if a substance is still of high risk, it means either something has not worked, or of course, it could be that the substance is very persistent, and even if it's a legacy one, the levels are still there. So here comes the second concept, which is ideally we need to focus earlier on the causal chain and target with measures activities, or at least release from activities. But if this is not possible, again, because, for instance, the substance may have been banned, we could even look at the remediation possibilities or even actions that could reduce the impact if these are unavoidable as such. Finally, another concept described in the strategic approach is that if we come up with options of how to potentially add value from regionally on addressing an issue or a substance, in general, those can be compared based on 4 factors. So effectiveness expected, resource efficiency, so how much time we expect that it would take to resolve the issue, or how much cost, secondary impacts, and fairness. These are the types of actions we foresee that HELCOM may be taking. On the right side, you see types of actions closely linked to existing policies, for instance, influencing substance listing in other policies, or even trying to improve this infrastructure of other policies, support national implementation of some directives, for instance, or quicker, more coordinated implementation, or even providing guidance to duty holders, or even improving enforcement actions. Then there are, in the so-called medium link to existing policies, there are actions which extend existing policies. So if there is really a need, stricter requirements or border requirements could be adopted, or if we see that an existing regulation may take too long time to have an effect, also an interim policy could be implemented by HELCOM until the other policy has an effect. Of course, if there's not existing policy which tackles an issue, if a new policy might need to be adopted regionally. And before I finish, if we step a bit back and see how this strategic approach is aims to interact with other processes, Owen talked about HELCOM indicators. So what's the link here? And if we compare the state assessment with a health check we do at the doctors, indicators could be seen to have similar role as laboratory tests. So very well established, defined tests provide very accurate results. Indeed, for the HELCOM indicators, there's commitment by contracting parties to gather and report representative data, the agreed threshold values, etc. And in that comparison, the role of the holistic framework would be the role of the doctor that utilizes, of course, the results of lab tests, but looks at further sources of information to make a better assessment of the situation. And now, if based on this holistic assessment, some parameter seems to be very important and that can be standardized, this could become a new indicator, which in the new cycle will fit in a better way also the holistic assessment. A similar interaction we see with the regulations such as the MSFT assessments. We utilize existing information, but hopefully the application of holistic framework will support and promote this further. So as Rüdiger said, the regional strategic approach now today was published on the website, so you can have a closer look there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasily. And we actually hear from you very, very soon again. The next presentation as well will be given by Vasilis, but thank you for showing this, how we can really reach and adapt the regional concrete actions. And also you show us these measures from different perspectives. I'm very convinced that in accompanying presentations, we'll talk more about also informational gaps that you mentioned and also other aspects as well. But now, if you have any questions, please let us know about it. And also during each presentation, I remind you, you can write your questions in this question and answer tool. For a while, one question comes to you. Does this kind of strategic approach exist in some other region in the world, or could it be replicated there? Vasilis or Lotta, which of you will take this question? Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe, Vasilis, you can complement, because we also have analyzed quite many of the existing other policies, regional and even global ones. And according to my understanding, such a detailed scheme with all these tools, how to actually run the framework and how to utilize different sources of data and in a structured way, and have these three different kind of approaches to risk and points of view in three different priorities assessed, is not existing anywhere else. But Vasilis, you can confirm if that's the right view. Thanks.
Yeah, indeed, as Lotta said, when we started the work, we had a look at existing frameworks, many of them, including, for example, about how the European Union prioritizes substances for the watch list or for the water framework priority list, etc., and other organizations as well, and other frameworks and guidances. We try to use the best elements and what fits to the marine environment. So every framework is fit for its own purpose. So that's why different frameworks are different. But indeed, the focus has been to develop a systematic approach where each piece of data has exactly a role, and this helps the approach to be evolve easily. So and so also very flexible in terms of resources. So I don't think there are many similarities with existing frameworks, but we hope it's fit for purpose for the marine environment, and also because it's flexible, it can be used also by different regional sea conventions or in different situations as well.
Thank you, Vasily. So we just need to as well remind that in the chat right now, you can find the links to the new strategy and the priority substances website. It's posted there, so please take a look on that. If no one has now other questions, otherwise we are going further to our program, and we are waiting your questions also during the next presentations, and also after the next session we will ask you to the speakers. And our next session now will be focusing on latest developments, what are the pressing issues. During this session we will have 4 presentations that will include more maybe overarching presentations on the substances that are most harmful to the Baltic Sea, as well as presentations covering examples of emerging substances and topics in this field. And of course, this is all based on the latest project results. And so many probably of you are wondering what substances have been identified as most worrisome in the region, and Vasilis will answer these questions in the first presentation. And after Vasilis, we will hear Markus Raudkivi, and Markus will talk about PFAS in the presentations titled The Ripple Effect, how the recent PFAS regulations shape our view of Baltic Sea contamination. And Markus is the project coordinator at HELCOM Secretariat for the Empress project, which aims to put together recommendations for monitoring and assessments of PFAS in the aquatic environment. But first, as I mentioned, we will listen to Vasilis again. So Vasili, are you ready?
Yes, almost. I will just share again the presentation. So let's continue then from where we left the previous presentation. So the previous presentation was about theory. Yes, such a system should work, but let's see how we implemented part of it, so the prioritization part in practice. So as explained, a couple of words maybe first before we get into the substances about clarifying the aims of the priority lists, because as explained, of course, the priority lists is a stepping stone towards the measures, the regional measures, but to ensure that the management steps are linked, so that the measures are based on the assessment made. However, the priority lists are also adopted in form of a HELCOM recommendation on their own, which also express some further, more generic aims of these priority lists beyond developing the regional action plan. So this is an extract from the preamble of the HELCOM recommendation, and based on which the HELCOM Commission recommends that the governments of the contracting parties strategically focus their work of HELCOM on the list of priority substances, with the aim, of course, to wherever possible to develop measures against the releases or where relevant about remediation or reducing the impacts. There's a sub-list, as we will see also in the next slides, of this list, which is called HELCOM Substances of Concern, where the uncertainty there is a bit higher, even though the evidence hints towards high risks for the Baltic Sea. And the recommendation there is that the governments gather further evidence of the risk of those other substances listed there. Horizontal measures, wherever possible, are also targeted towards the second priority list, so list of priority sources. And the idea, of course, there is to enable tackling not only the limited priority substances, but also other substances that may originate from the same sources. And of course, the recommendation is to reduce uncertainties, horizontal uncertainties listed under the third list. How we did the prioritization? So in general, following the strategic approach, we assessed 1,500 of substances with information about detected levels, but essentially we covered many more thousands of substances, as the non-target screening covered many ones that were not detected, for instance. About 350 to 400 of those fulfilled at least one of the criterion, presence, inputs, or analogous concerns, and they were listed in the master table. So any of those is likely of concern for the Baltic Sea. But this was shortlisted to 55 substances, HELCOM priority or HELCOM concern substances. How this was done, of course, ranking was used, but also further uncertainty analysis was performed. Market information we used as further weight of evidence and expert judgment, and all this in some workshop and a number of expert group on hazardous substances meetings. As said, so this list has been split into two, priority substances and substances of concern. what was sublisted under the substance of concern was substances for which evidence did not include marine monitoring. For instance, maybe the evidence was screening of the marine environment, so not methods developed for the specific substances. So, or maybe the priority was based on inputs monitoring. Or a substance may have been listed in the substance of concern list because expert judgment pointed towards listing it there instead. And again, a higher level overview of the two lists about the regulatory status of the substances they are in. As potentially you could imagine, in the HELCOM priority lists, there are many substances which are Water Framework Directive priority substances or priority hazardous substances, or they are proposed under its proposed update. Some of them also, about 5, I think, they are legacy substances, which are considered not to be used anymore. But they're at higher levels, of course, in the Baltic Sea. And there are a few, about 5, which are not listed in any specific regulation. And also there are 5 entries which are partly listed in other regulations. There are 33 in total what we have in the priority list. Under the concern list, the situation is different. So most substances are not specifically regulated. And there are some substances which are covered by other regulatory lists, such as the EU REACH SVH list, for example. And even a couple of legacy substances there as well. In the priority list, we had about 8 or 9 substances which are covered by HELCOM indicators. So yes, they are still very relevant. But also we got about 25 substances for which we currently do not have a HELCOM indicator. It could be considered for the future. None of the substances in the HELCOM concern list is covered currently by a HELCOM indicator. And those substances of concern, of course, we seek for further data to conclude if in the future they could be listed under priority substances in the next cycle after 6 years maybe. And information missing is typically confirmation of identity if it came from non-target screening or review of the threshold. So let's see now substances listed in the HELCOM list of priority substances, several metals, some also beyond what is included in the Water Framework Directive, organometallics such as organotins, which of course have some similar role and function such as biocides, as they use as antifouling paints, and some of those biocides we also have in the priority list. But organotins are also used in industrial applications. Not many people are aware of this. And saying industrial applications, we have other substances used there as well. Some pesticides, quite some of them seem to be legacy, but also some still used as cypermethrin or nicosulfuron. Some pharmaceutical substances, even substances used in consumer personal care products, and some hormones. Finally, we have substances generated by processes such as dioxins, hexachlorobenzene, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So those who are familiar with the Water Framework Directive priority list or the proposed update, of course, you will not notice that this is there are a lot of similarities between the two lists. From this perspective, maybe the HELCOM list of substances of concern may be more interesting, let's say, because there are more unfamiliar substances there. Again, starting from metals, we have cobalt and uranium. Some substances used in industrial processes, quite some of them also end up also in products, in commercial products that may be used by professional users or consumers even. But interestingly, quite some other substances in this HELCOM list of substances of concern, they use as flame retardants, at least as one among other functions. One of them, actually, the Chlorine Plus, has also been recently included in the Stockholm Convention. Some pesticides here, 2 of them might be legacy, at least they are not authorized in the EU, quinopren and prometon, so we have to see if they are just persistence residues from the past or they are coming from somewhere. And also some substances used mainly in personal care products. More information about all those 33 plus 22 substances is available in the fact sheets. So these are PDFs which were published as well today. There you can find a lot of information such as the evidence on which priority listing was based, causal chains, sectors where they are used, gaps to fill, and even existing measures, for instance, for industrial chemicals, if the European Chemicals Agency has included them under some assessment of regulatory needs under their integrated regulatory strategy, for instance. Here is an example of PFAS, one of the priority substances, HELCOM priority substances, on which Marcus, my colleague, will give a much more, will focus on in the next presentation. A very quick look on the second priority list, HELCOM horizontal relevant sources of hazardous substances. What is to note here is that there are some substances which was better to express along with the sources instead of listing them individually in the priority lists. Petroleum hydrocarbons, for instance, disinfectants used in also in the energy sector, for instance, sodium hypochlorite, which is used in LNG platforms, and also dumped munitions, for instance. Or emerging sectors also fit here quite well. Interestingly, the last priority list had a lot of entries, and what this is supposed to list is important data that was not available during exercise or could not process, or investigation needs that were triggered by analysis of existing data. And if these data were there, of course, the priority list and accordingly the actions would have been more likely to target really what matters the most for the Baltic Sea. So here it is an example of how those entries are expressed. So they always come with some examples of preliminary findings about what substances fall under this gap, and what would happen, how filling the gap would improve our processes. Examples here, you can see confirmation of identity, trends analysis, marine level information when we don't have it and when it's feasible to gather, actual chemicals in spills, predicting marine levels with models. Of course, very often we need more reliable information about marine quality standards, the so-called thresholds, or we need information about the background levels of some metals, for instance, in some organics. And also, we need to connect what we observed on biological effect as much as possible with the substance that may trigger it. And there are methodologies for this. And more comprehensive apportionment of inputs, of course, is always welcome, as well as identifying key drivers, such including also the influence of climate change on the hazardous substances. So all those you can find in the soon published, I think, HELCOM recommendation. But talking about gaps, we have to consider that before the whole exercise, we had many gaps in information, many uncertainties. A lot of those now we have solved already, so we have less gaps, not meaning that we don't have a lot to resolve. In previous meetings of the MSFD expert group on contaminants or European Commission review reports, there were statements that there's a general need to improve the identification of marine relevant contaminants. There was statements that the discussion on the selection of relevant contaminants by the regional sea conventions has been ongoing for many years, but it has been slow. So we have moved now we have made some steps further. We have utilized information generated by other policies, and we are hopefully in a better position to have targeted measures and even support and influence other policies. So as said, this has not been perfect, but hopefully it has been beneficial. And we hope with the help of you stakeholders in the next years, we can try to fill as many gaps as possible for those identified. And last but not least, there are some secondary byproducts of the whole process we did not realize, but by trying to assess the priority of substances, we gathered very detailed information about social apportionment for substances and even apportionment between the different pathways, which again is very useful in supporting HELCOM processes such as HOLAS indicators or even pollution load compilation assessment. And even have a detailed assessment about which substances are found in each assessment unit in Baltic Sea, which, as Gaston will explain later, can be linked with the biological effects observed. Thank you.
So thank you to Vasilis. It's my time to take the floor. So hello, everyone. My name is Markus Raudkivi, and I'm the Empress project coordinator here at HELCOM Secretariat. So now that you've gotten a very nice introduction into the new HELCOM priority substances list by Vasilis, let's have a bit more in-depth look into some of the newer groups. So in this presentation, let's take a closer look into PFAS that Vasilis mentioned twice as well. First, let's quickly remind ourselves what PFAS are. Known as the forever chemicals, PFAS are a large group of human-made substances that don't break down easily because of their strong carbon-fluorine bonds. PFAS were accidentally discovered in 1938 and became widely used by the 1950s, with Teflon being one of the most famous early products. Although their toxicity and ability to bind to blood proteins were discovered already in 1955, this information wasn't made public until late 1990s. As a result, many industries used PFAS for their water, stain, grease, and fire-resistant properties without fully understanding the risks. One of the most important uses of PFAS is in aqueous film-forming foams, or AFFs, which are used to extinguish liquid fires like burning jet fuel. The widespread use of these foams by military, municipal, aviation sites since the late 1960s has led to significant PFAS pollution worldwide. Although the use and production of PFOS, which is one of the key components in these foams, was restricted globally in 2009, the firefighting foams themselves were exempt from these restrictions due to their high efficiency. And one of the big challenges in managing PFAS comes from the sheer number of these substances. So according to the BABChem database, there are over 7 million substances that would fit the 2021 OECD definition of what a PFAS is. About 15,000 of these are more commonly known, but it's still very hard to determine how many are actually used by industries. This complexity arises also because we can only measure around 150 PFAS individually, even with the latest analytical techniques. Moreover, most of these PFAS are not commonly available in commercial labs, where you can maybe measure about 60. As a result, even the new EU proposal for water directives includes only 24 PFAS for measurement and assessment. So it's no surprise that many of the current assessments worldwide, including the HOLAS 3 assessment that we did in the Baltic Sea, are based on just one PFAS substance. The same PFOS that I just mentioned was already partially restricted since 2009. And the HOLAS 3 assessment that we have already mentioned today a few times didn't actually show PFOS as even one of the more problematic hazardous substances. While some threshold value issues were observed in the water matrix, biota or fish showed almost no exceedances. This threshold value used in the assessment is the one that is currently in effect in EU water regulations, and it is the one that is supposed to be used for all assessments today. At the same time, the information about PFAS has reached mass media. This map of the known PFAS pollution sites was published by French journalists working for Le Monde in February 2023, showing a large number of different proven and presumed sites of PFAS contamination. The article was also picked up by many other publications around the region, and PFAS has become a really hot topic. So this brings us to the question of what does it mean? Why do we have these contradictions between what we think is there and what we see in assessments? One of the main reasons is that the legislative train is just not as fast as the science fueling it. Changes, including those involving PFAS, have actually been in the works since late 2022, but the update to the Environmental Quality Standards Directive is only expected to be finalized later this year. These changes would significantly alter the system and threshold values that are used for all assessments. For PFAS, instead of basing the entire assessment on one substance, the new system would assign each PFAS substance a conversion value representing its toxicity relative to others. This approach would allow us to sum the different PFAS concentrations into one single value, which would just represent the total toxicity in PFOA equivalents. While the new threshold proposed for water would be less strict compared to the old PFAS one in numbers, it would now include 24 different PFAS, providing a more comprehensive overview of the actual pollution. The same applies to biota, but the new threshold would be even more than 100 times stricter than the old one. And that is because the new evidence shows that PFAS in fish can cause adverse effects for anyone who eats them, including us humans. So when we would be taking all of these new upcoming changes into account, what would it mean for the Baltic Sea region? This is where the Empress project comes into the picture as well. One of our main outputs of the project is the methodological recommendations for monitoring and assessment of PFAS in the aquatic environment. And I know this name sounds quite a mouthful, but it just simply means we examined how PFAS pollution should be better detected and better evaluated in the region. This helps us also understand the overall situation and has contributed to the new HELCOM strategic approach on hazardous substances, particularly where PFAS were concerned. And our report was officially published earlier this month and is now available online for everyone. The document examines the methodology of PFAS monitoring and even offers some strict recommendations on which tissues or substances should be prioritized over others. It also provides a sample assessment of the PFAS pollution in the Baltic Sea region, utilizing both the new EU proposals and the latest scientific knowledge. This assessment in the report is based on actual data gathered during a large PFAS data call we did in summer 2023. This resulted in an extensive database on PFAS from various sources in the Baltic Sea region, including not only marine but also inland sources like lakes and rivers. The database also includes 66 different PFAS, rather than just the 24 specified by EU. We collaborated with scientific literature and experts to propose precautionary potency values similar to the new EU system for all PFAS we had data for. And as a result, this work enabled us to sum all analyzed PFAS in a sample into a single value and compare it to the new proposed EU thresholds. For instance, if we look at the left side figure, about 1/3 of all water samples, whether from lakes, rivers, or seawater, would exceed the new threshold value, which is actually less severe than we estimated in HOLAS 3. From the complete other picture, however, almost all biota samples that you can see on the right, which are primarily taken from fish from various sources, would be potentially dangerous to human health. And this is a very, very alarming new result we didn't see before. To better understand the specific PFAS causing these issues, we use two statistical approaches. The table you see now examines all monitored data, showing how often and by how much each substance exceeds the threshold. Interestingly, the top 10 substances in the water matrix account for about 99% of the known cumulative pollution, with PFNA being the largest contributor, not PFOS as we expected. Notably, from this list of 10, 2 are not included in the EU list of 24 PFAS, with this 62FTS having a particularly large contribution in water that would be missed under the proposed EU system. We also applied a second statistical approach, focusing on how often a substance exceeded the threshold rather than cumulative pollution. This approach revealed different results, as new PFAS with very few measurements but very high concentrations appear in this table. From this top 10, only 5 substances are from the EU proposed list of 24, highlighting the need to stay vigilant for emerging PFAS as conditions in the water matrix change rapidly. Finally, let's look at some pollution trends around the Baltic Sea. This map shows only locations with data from at least 2 different years. Red indicates that at least one sample from the location exceeded the new proposed threshold. Triangles on the map show increasing or decreasing trends, while circles indicate no stable trends. So when we have a perspective on the map, we see that there are some decreasing trends, which are showing with these downwards pointing triangles. And these are especially obvious when we look around the Danish and Swedish coasts, and even Swedish inland places. But the overall situation does not actually show a Baltic-wide strong decreasing trend for PFAS pollution in water. When we move on to look at the biota results, the top 10 PFAS in total cumulative pollution are almost all very well-known substances, with just the top 6 accounting for over 95% of the pollution. Only one substance in this top 10 list is not in the EU list of 24. When we compare these results with the other approach, the list changes slightly, but PFOS still holds the top spot. 4 new PFAS show up in this table as well, while compared to water, on average, the known PFAS are much more prominent in biota. The Baltic Sea map for biota is almost entirely red. The only 3 green spots are reindeer samples from the Swedish mountains, while most other biota samples show dangerous concentrations of PFAS. Although a few bird, egg, and mammal samples were also included in parts of this assessment, and different trophic conversion factors were applied to them, most of the spots you see on this map actually just show fish samples. So this is an especially alarming problem we need to face. In summary, while PFOS didn't seem like a major issue in HOLAS 3 assessment, the situation would change drastically with the updated EU assessment system and new thresholds. According to these new values, most fish in the Baltic Sea region, whether taken from rivers, lakes, or the sea, would be potentially dangerous for human health. A few well-known PFAS are responsible for most of this pollution in biota. The positive news is that, on average, the concentrations in both water and biota are not anymore showing increasing trends. Some decreases can even be observed in the water matrix. However, a more holistic view reveals that many of these decreases in known PFAS are often accompanied by increases in newer and less frequently measured PFAS. It is well known due to various restrictions that the PFAS the industry uses can change so frequently that analytical methodologies and monitoring struggle to keep up. This is one of the main reasons why PFAS as a whole group was included in the new HELCOM priority substances list. And with that, it's all from me today on the topic of PFAS. I thank you very much for your attention. And if you'd like to see more information on the topic, please check out our brand new output. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markus, very much for your interesting presentation and showing us these different results and showing what happens to the Baltic Sea when the different and new threshold is, let's say, taken in account. And also thank you to Vasilis for your presentation when you showed as well. From one side, inspiring maybe part of your presentation, was that there are already gaps that are maybe solved, informational gaps, and the situation seems to be better, but it seems that we have still a lot of challenges to be solved in both the information gaps and also this new approach when we talk about it, how we will discuss also later today. There are still actions to be taken, but we will have questions to you both after our next presentations. 2 presentations still we have in this session, and this third topic will focus on pharmaceuticals in the Baltic Sea, delivered by Daniel Malnes. And Daniel was a PhD student at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, but until recently was a project researcher at the HELCOM Secretariat in the project of pharmaceutical substances in the Baltic Sea. And after Daniel, directly, we will hear as well presentation from Gaston Aluralde. The presentation will focus on cocktail effects on hazardous substances. And Gaston is a project researcher at the HELCOM Secretariat in the HAP-Hazard project, and he's a biologist who has been studying the biological effects of contaminants in the Baltic Sea. But as I mentioned, first, we will hear now Daniel, and I remind you again, if you have questions to all 4 speakers, we will have a questions and answers session also at the end of these 2 presentations. Please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator, for the introduction. As previously mentioned, my name is Daniel Malnes, and I was a project researcher at the HELCOM Project Pharmacy. And this presentation is pharmaceuticals in the Baltic Sea, importance and risks. Why do we study pharmaceuticals as environmental contaminants? Well, it is because they are intentionally biologically relevant. Most pharmaceuticals have undergone some type of animal studies in order to prove the efficiency of the drug prior to human use. Now, this is based on the similarities of biological functions in animal models and in humans, which are evolutionarily conserved. But the question becomes, how far does this evolutionarily conserved biological functions go? When these pharmaceuticals are found in the environment, which consequences does it have? Because what may be a wanted use in humans may be an unintended effect in the environment. Furthermore, we also know that pharmaceuticals are designed to affect biological functions at low concentrations. And additionally, we know that there are certain very interesting groups of pharmaceuticals which can have detrimental effects in the environment. We know that there are some pharmaceutical groups that are designed to kill off other types of organisms. Such is the case, for example, for antibacterials, or as they are also known as antibiotics. Now, what happens when these antibacterials enter the environment? May they affect, for example, cyanobacteria? We also know that there are antiparasitics, and they are intended to kill off different types of parasitic organisms. But when they are released into the environment, how does that affect organisms that were not the intended target of this medicine? Furthermore, we also know that there are some pharmaceutical groups that are designed to, quote unquote, stop different type of biological processes. For example, we have contraceptive pharmaceuticals, which may affect the reproductive success in organisms, or epilepsy medicines, which can affect the movement of different types of organisms. But of course, there are also many more different types of pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical groups to assess. So how do we protect the Baltic Sea from these different types of contaminants? In a recent HELCOM project, Pharmacy, 2 different types of Baltic Sea Action Plan actions were of primary focus. One was to improve the knowledge about the occurrence, the persistence, and the harmful effects of pharmaceuticals. The second objective was to identify priority pharmaceuticals based on either their releases into the aquatic environment, the environmental effects, and the available data on the pharmaceuticals' use in the Baltic Sea region. And these actions would then later help downstream actions of pharmaceutical pollution. There were 2 different types of data pipelines in the Pharmacy project to inform science-based policy. These were based on either occurrence data and sales data. And both of these different types of approaches share a fundamental similar assessment. Both rely on data processing and environmental hazard assessments. However, they have some different outcomes. We have a look on the left-hand side. The occurrence data was used to identify priority substances. These were substances that exceeded toxicity thresholds for marine organisms. Furthermore, we could also identify substances of concern, which were exceeding other types of thresholds. From the sales data, we could identify substances that would be interesting to screen in environmental matrices, and for finding the most suitable environmental matrix for doing such a screening, or potentially screening in wastewaters. Do these pharmaceuticals enter the environment at all, or are they actually removed in the wastewater treatment process? Now, let's move on to looking at some of the results, starting with the occurrence data. There were 9 different pharmaceuticals which had environmental quality standards for so-called other surface waters, which we here interpreted as for the marine environment. These 9 different priority pharmaceuticals came from 4 different pharmaceutical groups, namely hormonal preparations, antibacterials or antibiotics, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and anti-epileptics. What do these different types of pharmaceutical groups actually do? Let's start with the systemic hormonal preparations. In humans, they reduce the likelihood of unwanted pregnancies. But when they are present in the environment, it can affect the reproductive success of aquatic organisms. Now, some of these have a partly natural origin. For example, 17-beta-estradiol and estrone may be excreted from different types of organisms, such as, for example, cows and sows. Now, these are also, however, available as pharmaceuticals. We also have the strictly synthetic 17-alpha ethinyl estradiol, which is available as the contraceptive pill. The next group of pharmaceuticals is the antibacterials or the antibiotics. And this is a group of pharmaceuticals that is used against bacterial infections. For example, for the treatment of pneumonia, chlamydia, and ioneer infections. Now, all of these antibacterials have a negative effect on cyanobacteria, which is the most sensitive organism in the environment and that we have found so far for these group of chemicals. There's an additional concern here as well, which is the development of antimicrobial resistance. For example, we have two here, azithromycin and clarithromycin, which carry a higher potential for the selection of antimicrobial resistance. And what it means is that we risk losing the effectiveness of these type of medicine if this antimicrobial resistance progresses. And therefore, it is important to safeguard the antibacterial effectiveness by reducing their presence in the environment. Thirdly, we have the group of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. These are pharmaceuticals that are used to treat pain, inflammation, and high body temperatures in humans. Sometimes these are available as either creams or ointments, which is important because, why do I mention this at all? Because when these pharmaceuticals are applied to the skin, they don't go through the same metabolization process as when they go through the body and being actively taken up through the body's system and changed into different types of chemicals. But rather, a large portion of them actually stays on the skin. When we then later go into the shower and shower these off of the skin, it will mean that there's a larger share of pharmaceutical ingredients still available on the skin. And when this is being washed to the wastewater treatment plant, it will mean that we will have a higher load reaching the wastewater treatment plant. Finally, we have the group anti-epileptics, and in humans, this reduces involuntary shaking, and this is used as a medicine within epilepsy. And the environmental quality standard here is based on the reproductive success in the Daphnia organisms. Now, let's move on to the second part of the occurrence data, which is the proposed pharmaceuticals of concern. And we had in total 11 different proposed pharmaceuticals of concern from 6 different categories of pharmaceuticals. Why are these of concern? Well, it is because of one of 3 reasons. Either because they've exceeded a freshwater threshold, or they exceeded the antimicrobial selection potential in wastewaters, or because there's some information that suggested that the threshold value was going to be lowered with several orders of magnitude. I will not go into the details of the pharmaceutical groups in this case, but rather let's move on to the sales data. The sales data that we processed within the pharmacy project included approximately 1/3 of the population of the Baltic Sea catchment area. In total, approximately 1,500 pharmaceuticals were assessed, and a precautious approach showed that there were 38 different pharmaceuticals of particular interest, which had not yet been analyzed in any occurrence data. Now, this may be a more narrow list after further refinement if we can find information that reduces this list, that shows that they are not of environmental concern. For example, if we find that they are removed in the wastewater treatment process, if they are not really excreted from humans, or if they don't have environmentally hazardous properties. However, the pharmaceuticals that do remain on the list would be of interest to either screen in the environment or to screen in wastewater treatment plants. These 38 different types of pharmaceuticals of interest were distributed across 16 different categories. Some of these categories we have already touched upon as either priority pharmaceuticals or pharmaceuticals of concern. As we can notice here in the top, at the top, we can see that antibiotics and antibacterials have more than a third of these 38 pharmaceuticals that are of interest for screening. We also see that antiparasitic products and hormonal preparations are among these pharmaceutical groups of interest here. But we also have a few previously unmentioned categories of pharmaceuticals of interest. Maybe most notable, at least the one with the most number after antibiotics and antibacterials, are the so-called anti-neoplastic and immunomodulating agents. It's helpful to think of this group as anti-cancer medicines. Why do I mention this? Well, I believe it's interesting to study these ones because they can have one of three different types of effects. For example, they can inhibit or prevent the activity of the immune system within an organism. They can block different types of hormones, which is important for different types of life stages or in the mating processes or for reproductive cycles. Very important things for a healthy Baltic Sea. And they can also affect the functioning of the different cells in an organism. I'm not going to go through the remaining groups of pharmaceuticals, but we can have a look at this list and we can see that it demonstrates the diversity of potentially environmentally hazardous pharmaceuticals. All in all, the PharmaC project has a draft report, and in its current state, it proposes different types of priority pharmaceuticals. These are exceeding marine environmental quality standards. We have a few pharmaceuticals of concern. These are the ones that are exceeding other environmental quality standards or predicted no effect concentrations, meaning not marine thresholds. We also have a few pharmaceuticals of interest for sampling in environmental matrices, such as waters, sediments, or biota, and pharmaceuticals of interest for sampling in wastewaters. And that is all for me. Thank you for the attention.
So yes, good morning, everyone. So now I will present the last topic of this block, and I will introduce the topic of cocktail effect of hazardous substances and why adopting a holistic regional perspective is essential, especially for sensitive marine areas like the Baltic Sea. So first, let's see where do we stand. As we have discussed this morning, the Baltic Sea is facing significant environmental changes, and its overall status is far from good. As Owen mentioned previously, the recent HOLAS 3 identified hazardous substances as a major pressure impacting the Baltic Sea. And the common practice in most of these environmental risk assessments is to look at individual substances separately, as we have seen pharmaceuticals and PFAS. But lately, this traditional approach has been questioned since it overlooks a fundamental reality, which is that the Baltic Sea, as many other seas, are continuously exposed to complex mixtures of chemicals coming from different sources. So let's imagine the problem now as an iceberg, and then we have all the chemicals that we routinely measure, and those are the ones that are detectable and are regulated, so we pay attention to those. But those are only the tip of the iceberg. However, below the surface, there is a wide range of chemicals that remain undetected, either because they occur below analytical detection limits, there are unknown substances, or there are transformation products of other chemicals. And just to think about the situation, globally, there are over 120 million registered chemicals based on the CAS numbers, with approximately 80,000 to 100,000 identified in different marine environments. It is clear then that assessing each chemical individually is not feasible, and moreover, measuring only chemical concentrations alone doesn't considering how these substances behave in the environment, such as how they bioaccumulate in organisms or how they interact with varying environmental conditions. And this complexity is further increased when we consider all these combined in mixtures. Hence, relying only on single chemicals separately underestimate the actual risks posed by contaminants. So this brings us to the concept of cocktail effect or mixture effects, which describe the combined toxicity of multiple chemicals. So let's consider we have several individual chemicals, each present at what it seems to be safe concentrations, if we consider them to some kind of reference value. And in principle, there will be no risk. But when the substances occur together, we can have the situation that the combination can lead to additive toxicity, which is simply the sum of all the chemical individual effects. Or what is even worse, the combination can be synergistic. That means that the mixture is significantly more toxic or can be more toxic than the sum of each individual part. So we can end up in the situation that from apparently nothing happening, we are actually exposed to something potentially harm. So this cocktail effect is a significant of significant risk. It can lead to underestimation of the real harm. So, given the risk, how do we effectively detect and measure the impacts of these chemical mixtures? Here is where biological effects methods become essential. Instead of just measuring chemical concentrations, this biological effect approach directly measure responses in organisms. So they can tell us what is happening in the environment. So they are early warning signs that indicate chemical stress. So think of marine organisms as patients seeking for medical care. Typically, before experiencing severe consequences, the patient first exhibits symptoms. So similarly, these organisms under chemical stress, they show sublethal responses that we usually refer them to as biomarkers. So these biomarkers indicate exposure at different biological levels, ranging from molecular damage, like in the DNA, RNA, also alter enzymatic activities, stress proteins, physiological functions, or even organ damage in some cases. So the important point of these biomarkers is that there are well-established links between toxicological mechanisms and chemical exposure, as well as standardized assessment criteria that permit us to differentiate contaminant-related impact from natural variations. Another important point is that they provide different pieces of information. So several biomarkers are used together to assess the health status in the environment. So the use of biological effects has the potential of detecting problems before they escalate into severe ecological impacts as an early warning, as I mentioned, but also permit to account for mixture effects, making them a relevant tool for proactive environmental management. So just to illustrate the general concept of how the biological effects can be practically applied, what we do is to try to establish a link between chemical concentrations in different matrices like water, sediment, and biota. And we looked at specific biomarkers in the organisms, and also we look at the general parameters of health, animal health. And then we integrate all this information to have a more holistic approach and assess the effect of contaminants in the environment. So Now let's look at two practical examples. The first one comes from the HOLAS 3 report, where we conduct a case study of an integrated assessment following an established methodology that is used also in the OSPAR region, where both chemical, as you can see in this pink bar, identified by C, chemicals concentrations were assessed together with biological effects, the blue bar indicated by effect and exposure. And these parameters were contrasted against an assessment criteria. Simply put, this criteria works like red is poor condition and green and blue, it's okay. So we conducted this study in using samples coming from the Swedish coast. And what we saw in this case study is that at some sites, the chemical concentrations alone indicated already some level of risk in the environment, yet the biological effects didn't show any indication. However, in other sites, biological assessment revealed substantial negative impacts, even though the chemical concentrations were indicating the opposite. So this clearly demonstrates that combining chemical and biological assessment provide a more accurate reflection of the environmental health, ensuring that we can identify hidden risk and avoid underestimating of environmental threats. The second example comes from the prioritization process, where we use biological effects to identify mechanisms of toxicity. So individual biological effects were grouped in the main toxic mechanisms, and this was quantified per assessment unit. And we contrast this against the same assessment criteria, and we identify how many of these toxic mechanisms were exceeding a threshold and happening in different assessment units. And this information was used to flag group of contaminants and also to raise some kind of warning when prioritizing contaminants. So particularly, specific toxicity mechanisms were highlighted, allowing observed biological effects to be considered. These are the toxic mechanisms identified and were considered in the context of the occurrence of different substances for which we know some mode of actions, and were identified either exceeding or not thresholds in different assessment units. So these allow us to target more specific relationships between detected contaminants and a specific toxic mechanism taking place in the environment. So in the Baltic Sea, the monitoring of hazardous substances, mainly follows HELCOM commitments under the Baltic Sea Action Plan and the EU regulations such as the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And although effects monitoring is recognized as an essential component under the Baltic Sea Action Plan, HL13 and the descriptor 8 of the MSFD, formal use in the existing HELCOM assessment and indicators is still limited. We have these three indicators related with biological effects. One is the white eagle tail eagle, the imposex indicator, and the reproductive aberration in amphipods. However, over the past 2 years, a consortium of projects and a joint group of study with OSPAR have been collaborated to validate and integrate biological effects methods into regional contaminant assessment. And while each initiative addressed the different aspects of biological effects, there were some core shared objectives, such as promoting the practical implementation of biological effects in monitoring programs, providing clear guidelines for method application, developing and testing integrated data approach, and identifying implementation obstacles and proposing practical solutions to be included during the assessment. Therefore, in this way, besides the action previously listed during the morning, this work over these years has also addressed HL13 of the Baltic Sea Action Plan, which aims by 2028 develop further relevant monitoring for the biological effects of hazardous substances in order to facilitate a reliable ecosystem health assessment. So to summarize and conclude, we can highlight that unlike traditional chemical analysis, biological effects methods allows assessment of the combined toxic impacts of chemical mixtures on living organisms. And this approach is especially valuable as it detects harmful effects even when the individual chemicals occurring at concentration are too low to trigger regulatory concern. Therefore, there is a clear need to shift beyond assessing individual substances alone and to complement with the biological effects, also to consider the combined effect of chemical mixtures. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much, and sorry for the confusion at the beginning.
Thank you, Gaston. No worries. Thank you for your interesting presentation. And yeah, it's more than clear that just measuring the concentration of the substances is not enough when we want to understand what is happening in the Baltic Sea, and not only Baltic Sea, actually, when all these substances that were designed to kill organisms or stop biological processes enter the water. But if we have questions, it's right now time to ask all four speakers questions. And before we go to the lunch break, we still have time for it. Maybe, Gaston, I will start with you, the question that goes to you. You were the presenter just right now, so maybe you can answer the question. It seems that this is an important topic still in development. What are the key next steps for furthering our understanding of mixture effect of substances and how they can affect species? Do you have something to comment on this?
Yes. So, well, as I mentioned before, there are still a lot of contaminants that we don't know that what they are doing in the environment and what are the consequences on the marine organisms. And although we have some level of knowledge, integration still challenging, and of course, developing threshold values for assessment. So there is still work to do.
Thank you. Thank you. There's one question that goes to Vasily. Vasily, if you are here, so about the priority substances that you presented at the beginning of this session. You analyzed the long list of substances, but mentioned that there are still gaps in our knowledge. Could there still be some substances that are very harmful to the environment in the Baltic Sea that we don't know about? So what is your comment on this?
I would say definitely. We assess the thousands of substances, but the reality out there can be different often. So, for instance, if I highlight the fact that in terms of analyzing regional market sales information, we didn't go very far. We could only collect sales information for dedicated sectors such as pharmaceutical substances, which Daniel mentioned. And of course, market information, as also is an example of the EU REACH regulation and where the assessment are based, can highlight many more substances than those that can be detected or can be detected at relevant levels, especially the marine environment. So we did our best, but we definitely cannot exclude that there are very hazardous substances that are having some impacts currently. And one of the possibilities forward could be, as now the indications about what may be missing partially come from the monitoring of biological effects. And there are already ideas now that we're discussing about measures how to fill those gaps, applying methodologies such as effect-directed analysis in the assessment units where biological effects were observed. For instance, where neurotoxicity appeared to be an issue, we try to see the substances which we have detected in those areas. Do they explain these effects, or we're missing something else. So at least we have a way forward of how to identify potentially very harmful substances which are not aware yet.
Thank you. There is also one question to Markus. Are there any plans in HELCOM or in the EU to restrict the use of PFAS substances, or is this impossible since there are so many of them? You have something to say about this?
I think this is a very, very acute question. And we know that there is a big initiative that was submitted to ECHA to a Europe-wide ban on PFAS and their uses. But as much as we know at the moment, industries were asked to let know if there are any really important uses of PFAS that can't be switched to at the moment. And ECHA got hundreds of different requests for these derogations, and they are still looking through it. But there is a very big initiative at the moment to ban all PFAS in EU.
Thank you. There is also a question to Daniel on pharmaceuticals. With medetomidine, there is a pharmaceutical intentionally released to the environment as antifouling compound. It is an endocrine active compound for crustaceans and sedative for mammals, including humans. Is there any plan to study occurrence of this persistent compound in the Baltic ports and the marinas? Daniel, can you please answer the question?
Sorry, could you clarify which compound it was?
It was medetomidine. I think.
I think that speaking to this specific one, it could have been picked up in Vasileia's work, honestly, especially considering if it's also a biocide and has a shared use. So depending on if it has been picked up already in Vasileia's work, it might have gotten some type of risk ranking already. But of course, Vasileia's work is very expensive. So from that perspective, it might perhaps not been taken up there. But if we have found out that from the pharmaceutical use side that it has been of particular interest, then it's going to be under that list of pharmaceuticals of interest in that case.
Thank you. One more question to Gaston. Gaston, if you're ready, are the microplastics considered in the bioassessment? This is a question from, yep.
Yes, no, microplastics are not included in this assessment because they are treated on a different process of HELCOM. So it's considered under marine litter.
Okay, thank you for the answer. We are still waiting. Maybe someone else wants to come up with a question very fast because we still have a few minutes before we go to the lunch break. And if there's something else you want to say, please let us know right now. There are comments only, I see. Okay, so I won't maybe keep you here longer. We are coming back here at 1 o'clock Helsinki time for the second part of today's conference, and there we'll talk more about how to achieve the good environmental status of the Baltic Sea. And maybe if we heard in previous presentations that there are still a lot of things to be done because the status is not far as we would like to see it right now. And also we'll talk a lot in also group discussion about what we can do about this One Baltic approach, and we see this vision, how it will become more clear in the next hours. So the only thing I would like to ask you, please do not leave this conference meeting while you're on lunch, because it will be much easier when you come back directly afterwards. So have a good lunch break and see you in 1 hour here. So hello everyone. I hope you are back from lunch break, and I hope that you had really nice and 1 hour time to get more energy for the rest of our conference. We will continue our work in the following way, that at the very beginning we will have a few presentations, one bigger presentation and then few shorter presentations from our stakeholders about what we can do to reach our goal to have a healthy Baltic Sea. And after that, there will be group discussions, and how they will happen and what we need to do to take part in them, I will explain you a bit later. But I really hope that you'll be also very active participants by asking questions and also sharing your comments. And I remind you that you can do it by writing your comments and answers to our chat or question and answer tool here. So at the very beginning and the first part of our conference, I would say we were focusing more on things that are very important. We want to raise awareness of this topic, and we talked a lot about this substances, the emerging substances, and most harmful substances. We were addressing also and seeing these different pathways, how they are entering the Baltic Sea. We talked a lot about the gaps also in knowledge and other things we need to improve. And now I would like to say that we will talk more about concrete actions and what we need to do to reach our goal to have Baltic Sea unaffected from these hazardous substances. And for the first presentation, I would like to invite here Susanna Kaasinen, Associate Professional Secretary at the HELCOM Secretariat, who supports the work of the HELCOM Expert Group on Hazardous Substances, and she will present on actions for a healthy Baltic Sea towards a common goal. And as I mentioned already before, after Susanna, we will hear 4 brief but very insightful presentations from stakeholders. So, Susanna, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a moment, I will share my presentation. All right. Yes, indeed. I will focus on what action has HELCOM taken or is planning to take to tackle the problem of hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea. First of all, a few words about the tool that HELCOM has at its disposal. So our Executive Secretary already in the morning mentioned the Helsinki Convention, which is of course the basis of our work. In addition, HELCOM gives recommendations. We heard about this morning, one of them about the recommendation on priority substances, which is to give focus to the HELCOM work on hazardous substances. We have also others targeting, for example, certain sectors like municipal wastewater treatment. And then we have action plans. We have, of course, the Baltic Sea action plan, but we also have regional action plans. We have one on litter and underwater noise, and we are planning to have one on hazardous substances as well. And then, as explained by my colleague Owen earlier, we track our progress in reaching the good state of the Baltic Sea with monitoring and making assessments. So the Baltic Sea Action Plan, this is the strategic program of work for HELCOM for reaching a good environmental status of the Baltic Sea. It was first adopted in 2007 and it was updated in 2021. And this picture you already saw. It gives the structure of the Baltic Sea Action Plan. So there's the vision of having a healthy Baltic Sea environment. And then there are 4 goals that represent the 4 segment, the biodiversity segment, with the goal of Baltic Sea ecosystem is healthy and resilient. Then there's, of course, the hazardous substances and litter segment with the goal of Baltic Sea unaffected by hazardous substances and litter. There's the sea-based activity segment with the goal environmentally sustainable sea-based activities. And then the eutrophication segment with the goal Baltic Sea unaffected by eutrophication. Then there are also various horizontal topics addressed in the Baltic Sea Action Plan, like climate change and economics and ocean analysis. And as mentioned already, of course, most of the actions about hazardous substances are in the hazardous substances and litter segment, but there are also many actions in the sea-based activities segment. And also in the horizontal topics, there are actions addressing hotspots that deal also with hazardous substances. And there's even an action in the eutrophication segment, or even a few that address hazardous substances. So there's plenty of coverage in the SUP. So a bit more about this segment on hazardous substances and litter. So they, in addition to the goal, there are also ecological objectives on hazardous substances. For example, that marine life is healthy and concentration of hazardous substances are close to natural levels. And then there's a management objectives, minimize input and impact of hazardous substances from human activities. And as mentioned, also there are many actions in the sea-based activities segment, and there's even a management objective mentioned in hazardous substances, saying to minimize the input of nutrients, hazardous substances, and litter from sea-based activities. So in total, the Baltic Sea Action Plan has 199 actions. As mentioned already earlier today, there are around 30 actions in the hazardous substances and litter segment, but there are overall over 40 actions that deal with hazardous substances in the SUP. And the actions are to be implemented by HELCOM contracting parties. So these are the coastal countries of the Baltic Sea and the EU, either jointly together or then nationally, or some actions have elements of both. And you have already heard some strange codes today maybe. So each action has a code. The first has a letter or two letters that signify in which segment it is, and then the number of the actions to make it more easily to refer to the actions. And all actions are to be implemented by 2030 at the latest, but many of them have target years that are already earlier than this. And each action has a agreed criteria for achievement. So what needs to be done that we can consider that the action is accomplished. We have the first reporting on implementation coming up at the end of this year. And although the action plan is to implement it by the contracting parties, stakeholders are very vital in supporting the implementation, and that's why we are here today. So a bit more about the various topics that the actions on hazardous substances deal with. So first of all, in the sea-based activities segment, there are actions deal with hazardous substances targeting shipping and response to spills, also dredging and submerged hazardous objects. Then in the hazardous substances segment, there are actions dealing with industry, about influencing other policies, pharmaceuticals, the general public, then actions regarding specific substances, such as our substance groups, such as PFAS, mercury, lead, and dioxins. And then there are actions in the eutrophication segment about wastewater treatment that could also, in the future, target hazardous substances. I'm going to give you a few examples of actions. And they are chosen so that they would be informative for the group discussions we're having later today. So first of all, examples on actions targeting the general public or small businesses or the local level. So we have an action to decrease the emission of hazardous substances from small-scale emitters in urban areas by chemical smart purchasing strategies, substitution and awareness raising campaigns. We have an action to launch educational and information campaigns to raise public awareness on responsible handling of hazardous substances in household chemicals. And also we have an action to decrease dioxin emissions by establishing campaigns and other instruments focusing on the quality and species of firewood. The next two examples from the sea-based activity segment. We have an action to carry out a study on volumes and impact of discharges of residues of noxious liquid substances contained in cargo tank washing waters and take action afterwards. And we have a pitch presentation coming of this exact topic. And then we have an action to minimize the release of biocides from antifouling products to the marine environment from structures, equipment, and recreational craft. Then regarding pharmaceuticals, you already heard about some action we have taken so far, but there are other actions as well. For example, action to organize an information campaign on what not to flush, to strengthen the collection of unused pharmaceuticals in the public, and in cooperation with healthcare institutions, increase awareness and knowledge of consumers about pharmaceuticals containing substances that are persistent and harmful for the environment. Then for the energy section, one example action we have is undertake all possible measures to reduce mercury emissions from the energy sector. And then these actions I've been mentioning about wastewater treatment. It's about strengthening the HELCOM recommendation 28E/5 on municipal wastewater treatment. This action or this recommendation currently only deals with reducing nutrient discharges from wastewater treatment plants, giving requirements for removal, but in the future it could also deal with hazardous substances. Then about this regional action plan on hazardous substances. So this is a commitment from the Baltic Sea Action Plan, this already mentioned action coded HL1 that deals with making the strategic approach, which is now adopted. But the second part of the action is making an action plan on hazardous substances. And this action plan is currently being drafted in HELCOM, and it's currently planned to be adopted next year. And the idea is that it would contain the Baltic Sea Action Plan actions on hazardous substances that are yet not implemented and new actions. And of course, we are basing this work on the information gathered during the establishment of the strategic approach, so that now that we have a more holistic picture of hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea, what kind of gaps did we have in the Baltic Sea Action Plan that should be filled with these new actions? And these could be new actions in the Regional Action Plan on hazardous substances. As mentioned, it's currently in very draft stage, but I'm giving a few examples of the topics that have been proposed. So for wastewater treatment, there has been a proposal on accelerating the timeline for implementation of the revised EU Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and once adopted, the revised HELCOM recommendation on municipal wastewater treatment. Then on offshore activities, there's been a proposal on an action to reducing potential environmental impacts from offshore wind farms, including release of hazardous substances. Then on pharmaceuticals, on ensuring that environmental aspects are part of veterinary, medicinal, and pharmacy training and professional development programs, and on ensuring environmental expertise in committees and networks on pharmaceutical regulation and safety. And for industries, proposal on recommendations on the placing on the market or use by professionals or consumers of industrial products in synergy with the EU REACH regulation. And as you heard in the morning, while a lot of information was gathered on hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea, there are plenty of gaps still that needs to be filled. So there would be an action on filling the key knowledge gaps identified when creating this HELCOM list of priority substances. So that's a quick introduction on what action HELCOM is taking, and we look forward to your input this afternoon on if you can support us and implementing the Baltic Sea Action Plan and the upcoming Regional Action Plan on hazardous substances. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for your quick and interesting and very concrete presentation. As we heard from almost 200 actions, 40 more than 40 are dealing with the hazardous substances. So we as well can understand from these different perspectives, as you mentioned, that there's something we need to do in different sectors, starting from household and ending with the sea-based activities and different industries. And I would like to say that the next presentations, short ones from stakeholders, actually will focus on these issues. And first, I would like to ask Julia Suikula, project manager from the John Nurminen Foundation, will shed light on noxious liquid substances in cargo tank washing waters, a pressing topic that you may have seen covered also in news recently. So a bit technical presentation probably will follow, but I remind as well other participants that you need to use chat options today to ask questions, because there's a bit technical issue with the question and answer tool right now. So I really hope to see questions from you coming after this session to all speakers. And so Julia, if you are here and if you are ready, please, the floor is yours. Do we have Julia here?
Yes, now.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't have the presenter right, so I was trying to figure that out. But here, now you should be able to see my presentation, hopefully. I'm Julia Suikula from Jan Nurminen Foundation. I'm working as a project manager there, and simply our foundation's aim is to save the Baltic Sea and its heritage. But I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go forward immediately. I'm going to talk about NGOs' roles in tackling the issue more in general, and then also more specifically on our work on the chemical tanker discharges. And while governments and industries play an important role in tackling this issue, I think NGOs are also very, very crucial in doing this. There are many ways in which NGOs can help to minimize the release and impact of hazardous substances. Many NGOs engage with corporations to promote cleaner production methods and also pollution reduction strategies. We have been sharing the best practices within the industry and have tried to find resolutions to reduce the discharges of hazardous substances with the companies together. And also advocacy and policy influence is also very important. NGOs can influence governments and international bodies to strengthen regulations on hazardous substances, pushing for example, stricter environmental laws and also more sustainable policies. Then capacity building, circulating information and influencing problems that are not yet fully addressed. We can, for example, start the work and bring people together when, for example, resources are tight in other sectors. And then increasing public awareness is also important. Sometimes, at least I feel like that issues related to hazardous substances are a bit hidden from consumers, so it's important to bring light to them. And then finally, sharing experiences from the Baltic Sea to other regional seas is also important, because the problems or issues related to hazardous substances are usually international problems. But then what we at Jan Nurminen Foundation have done regarding this subject, we have also been working on hazardous substances, especially on the Action S16 that was presented earlier, and that is under the sea-based activities in the Baltic Sea action plans. Just shortly, about the subject in general, usually after unloading their cargo, chemical tankers often wash their tanks with seawater en route to the next port of loading within certain limitations. The permitted cargo residue, that is the chemical, per tank is from 75 liters to 350 liters, and usually a chemical tanker has many tanks, so the chemical residues can be quite big. And there are also many illegal discharges and undetectable discharges, meaning that chemical discharges are released too close to the shore or in excessive volumes. For example, we had a case in Finland in January in which these vegetable and animal-based fat clumps were found at the Hanko shores, and they have been cleaning the discharges from that until this day. So yeah, illegal discharges happen quite often, and some of them remain undetectable because of the chemical properties. But then in 2022, year 2022, we launched Chemical Tanker Project to implement the Action S16 with the partners shown in the slide. The project began with a risk assessment to identify the chemicals that could potentially have the greatest harmful impact on the marine environment and human health. We focused on the category Y chemicals in MARPOL Annex 2, which are described as chemicals that are harmful to the Baltic Sea, marine resources, or human health. The identified chemicals in Finland were crude tall oil, styrene, and benzene. And after the risk assessment, we tried to find solutions to reduce the most harmful discharges together with the chemical industry to find better washing practices, or also ways to handle the washing waters on shore effectively so they wouldn't end up into the Baltic Sea. Then shortly, our achievements. We made the frame for the risk assessments, which was created and presented at the HELCOM Maritime meeting last October. And the Finnish report is actually now finalized. So I'll link it into the chat after my presentation. So I suggest you to look it up. And then we did industry collaboration. We stopped all Finnish tall oil discharges into the Baltic Sea in collaboration with the Finnish tall oil refineries. So that was very good. And actually, we have just prevented some styrene emissions as well. But the prevention of chemicals is not that simple because it's still legal, and there are costs involved to get the washing waters on shore and handling them. And we also had a workshop last spring, which accelerated the risk assessment process in HELCOM countries and promoted the inclusion of chemicals under mandatory pre-wash requirements. And we have a second HELCOM workshop planned on the 16th of May this year. So put that in your calendars. There's more information to come about that later. But because this project only implemented the Baltic Sea Action S16 in Finland through the risk assessment and collaboration with the industry, we have decided to scale up the chemical tanker project to all HELCOM states now. So we have a new project coming called the Baltic Chemical Tanker Project. And my last slide. The objective of the Baltic Chemical Tanker Project is to eliminate the discharges of tank cleaning washing waters from the most hazardous chemical tankers or chemical discharges into the Baltic Sea, and the implementation of HELCOM Baltic Sea Action S16 wholly. Yeah. And our measures are country-specific risk assessments to identify the most hazardous risk chemicals. The Action S16 includes that every HELCOM country should make their own country-specific risk assessment. So we are implementing that through consultancy work, so there would be no costs involved in doing the country-specific risk assessment. And also we are thinking of influencing regulation, compiling all the best practices related to tank washing into an official document. And then we are planning some HELCOM workshops, and also we are going to continue the voluntary corporate collaboration in other HELCOM countries. So I have been contacting some of the HELCOM Maritime members about this project, but please, I urge you to be in contact with me if you would like to be involved in the project, because this is a very good opportunity to get your country-specific risk assessment done and implement your part of the Baltic Sea Action S16. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And yeah, I wish you all the best for the coming activities, what you just mentioned. And also, thank you for sharing your experience on how NGO can help to minimize the release and the impact of these hazardous substances. The next presentation will focus on municipal wastewater management, and we will have this presentation from Ivar Rubel from AS Tallinna Vesi. And Ivar will tell us more, and probably later on you will discuss more about how the management of hazardous substances is tackled in the field of municipal wastewater management. So Ivar, I hope you hear us and see us and you're ready for your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Just...
Już ma 4 slajdy, dobre. Bo ja mam 6. Nie.
Can you see the slideshow?
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay. So yes, as I was introduced, my name is Ivar Rubel. I am the COO of Tallinna Vesi. We are the largest wastewater treatment. We are operating the largest wastewater treatment plant in Estonia, with an effluent flow straight to the Baltic Sea. So I was given a few questions that I could answer here. So these are the thoughts that came into mind. Regarding hazardous substances, right now, I would say we're regulated mostly on chemicals and heavy metals, but the micropollutants are still coming. In regards of the chemicals and heavy metals, some existing national regulations were changed last year. One heavy metal was thrown out of the legislation. It was barium, and also copper and zinc limits were raised because of the previous levels were too low, and wastewater treatment plants in all over Estonia were not having a very easy time of it complying to the necessary regulations. They were a bit too much. At the same time, last year, the new urban wastewater treatment directive came out, which in a way showed us the path ahead. We are going to be getting a lot of new tricky chemicals and pharmaceuticals that need to be deep cleaned out of the wastewater, and this will be a major challenge for our company and also for Tartu Veeverk, which is the second largest wastewater treatment plant in Estonia. We are both over 150,000 human equivalent, so we will have the quaternary stage treatment made mandatory. So we will have to construct this quaternary stage of treatment for, I think it was 2033. And that will be a major challenge for us. And this will look at pharmaceuticals and also other cosmetic chemicals, but not PFASs at this moment. And I would say that most of the discussion in regards to hazardous substances has been about this new directive. We're also very interested about the PFAS phase-out discussions that are going on at the EU level. I know that there hasn't been any hasn't been many results on that yet, but there has been discussions on phasing out these chemicals, which we all know by as forever chemicals. So these are the things we should be looking at. What are the challenges for us in terms of the new directive? Well, the first challenge is that as fast as we can regulate substances at the same speed, new substances keep popping up. So this in a way is bad, but also in a way can be good, because if larger knowledge in the society is made aware that these substances are not good, they are bioaccumulating, and they are basically bad for everyone, then maybe the invention will start going towards making these substances in a way that they are biodegradable and not so harmful for bioorganisms. There's been a lot of talk about what should the quaternary stage of treatment, what technology should it use, and right now there are no definite answers. Our company with other companies near the Baltic are in an ongoing project with Interreg to find the best technology to do this deep clean of wastewater. But right now, no definitive answer is there yet, so this is a challenge. Also, cost allocation for the quaternary stage and extended producer responsibility. We don't know how the cost allocation will go. It is said that the producers of the pharmaceuticals and cosmetics should bear the most of the cost, but no definitive framework has been made up yet. And we already know that the industries who should be paying for it are already on the warpath not to do it. So this will be very interesting to see how it plays out. Also, we're talking about handling the problem at the end source, meaning the wastewater treatment plant. But it should be thought of in another way. We should be dealing with point sources, and we should be handling the pollution where it's, where it's made. We shouldn't be dealing with it at the end point, but where it's released into the environment. So, in my view, we should be regulating that as well. So, just not to pay for getting it out, but deal with not getting it in the environment. That's my view on the matter. And also, economical feasibility of the treatment. For the larger treatment plants, this treatment stage can be constructed in one way or the other. It's just a matter of cost, because we have the scale effect. We have a lot of clients who can pay the tab. But if we look at the smaller wastewater treatment plants, 10,000 to 150,000 human equivalents, if some of them should construct a quaternary stage because of risk assessment results, then I don't see how they are capable of doing it, because they don't have the financial resources to do this. Not now, not never, because they just don't have the clients who will pay for it. And that's the biggest thing to think about with the directive. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivar, so much. I hope that what you mentioned, all these also new requirements for municipal wastewater treatment will help to deal with this, as you mentioned, tricky chemicals. And thank you for illustrating also your major challenges in this field. I remind the audience, if you have questions, please keep them or actually write them already now, either in question and answers tool or chat, and we will address them a bit later. But our next presentation will be about reducing air emissions from the energy sector. And the next presentation will be given by, sorry, Grzegorz, I hope I pronounce it correct, your surname, Grzeszbek. You are head of the climate unit with the city of Krakow, and you will give us a short presentation about this air emissions in the energy sector. Please, the floor is yours.
Exactly. Hey, everybody. I'm really glad to be here with you and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about our experiences in fighting pollutions. Because, I'm Grzegorz Grzybczyk, and I believe it's difficult to pronunciate. I work in City of Krakow, Department of Environment, Climate and Air. And few facts about Krakow. It's the second largest city in Poland. it has 800,000 people, maybe even million, when we count how much water we use and how much waste we produce. And those factors are rather honest. Academic center, a business center, and very historical city, but also a city of innovation and business. And of course, we are not located at the sea, but we are located at Vistula River that goes to the sea, to the Baltic Sea. So pollutions are important in Kraków for the city, but also for the rest of Europe and the sea. Well, now we are dealing with the emissions of greenhouse gases. We are part of the mission of 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030, and we are proud of it, even it's a really challenging subject. But we have some practices. I mean, about 10 years ago, Kraków was known in Poland for having big problems with smoke, with air pollution. And it was not because we were exceptionally polluted city, but we were first to measure and to commonly explain that we have the problem. And it was huge work, cooperation of municipality, of local government, of people, NGOs, and so on. We managed to prepare the air protection program for whole voivodeship, for our region. That was aimed to lower levels of PM10, PM 2.5, and nitrogen dioxide. Finally, we have our anti-smoke resolution. And since September 2019, in Kraków, it's forbidden to use solid fuels. No coal, no wood, only liquid or gas fuels. And, you know, but it's not that simple to say it's forbidden. If you want people to accept the change, you have to help them, right? So about 45,000 solid fuel fireplaces were eliminated, and the city was paying for this. And of course, there were many people who were asking why we pay with public money for private furnaces, private fireplaces, but it was for common good. So it was worth it, definitely. Now, in February 2025, we have only 80 solid fuel fireplaces in Kraków. So it's huge change, and it's also huge change in air quality and in pollution. And we can say that it was huge success for the city. When you compare in this small table contamination in 2018 and 2023, you can see the progress. Of course, it's for the city, and we need to surrounding cities, gminas, to join the pact, because only then the progress will be even bigger, right? And of course, we are working on this. But city itself was the first city in Poland to forbid solid fuels, and it changed a lot. And that's why we are looking bravely into future and into implementation of our climate city contract for Kraków, because actually we know how to do it. Of course, the scale is much bigger, and we know that. And in our contract, we want to decrease emissions by 80% by 2030. I'm not sure if it's possible, but definitely we will try. And we have in mind that greenhouse gases and pollution are different things, but they are have something in common. They very often go from the same sources, like cars or house heating. So decreasing both goes together very often. And of course, our change, our climate transformation, it's profitable, right? Because we have to invest a lot of money, but we, at the end of the day, have a real improvement of our situation. So it's, of course, worth it. And here you can see the 8 key actions for Krakow. And of course, it's decarbonization of district heating system, development of citizen energy communities, renovation of municipal public buildings, and modernization of lighting in Krakow, construction of metro, very ambitious plan, and of course we will be not ready until 2030 with metro. Because we are just starting, renovation of residential buildings, increasing resilience to climate change, and of course, and perhaps the most important part is involving citizens, business in city management. So it may be ambitious, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed for the success of these actions. Thank you.
Thank you as well for really sharing your experience, Krakow's experience, and I hope also that in other regions we can achieve a significant reduction of emissions coming from energy sector. And the next presentation will focus on reduction of emissions of pharmaceuticals. And that's why I would like to ask here Jan Voeltz, representing the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, and also he's head of ecotoxicology at Bayer. So Jan, if you're ready, the floor is yours. This will be the last presentation from our stakeholders.
Thank you, and I will share my screen. And start the presentation. So hopefully you can see my first slide.
Yes, everything is okay. Thank you.
I will take this off. Okay. Yeah. As you said, I'm head of ecotoxicology at Bayer, but we're presenting today FPIA. Well, then, first of all, thanks for invitation to the HSC 2025. And then you explained already this awful acronym. What FPIA in the end is the association of the innovative human pharmaceutical companies, and that means representing those companies that conduct research and development of new medicinal products, which is important to understand, as there are other companies on the market that focus on the generics, and that is normally then the business of the out-of-patent medicines. So, having said that, we as FPIA welcome the exchange and the opportunity here to inform on our activities that address the field of and help to minimize emissions of pharmaceuticals in the environment. And I will dive deeper into this topic in the next slide. So first question I was asked, what is currently happening in the pharmaceutical sector to minimize the release and impact of pollution from hazardous substances? So first of all, FPIA and its member companies, just as mine, we are actively engaged in addressing environmental issues related to pharmaceuticals, but we use the acronym PI for, so pharmaceuticals in the environment. So we are aware of the topic and we are in it. And we have quite some activities where we proactively, without any legal pressure, started to explore options to improve the situation. And the first of that is what is here given with a second bullet point, a technical guidance document called Responsible Manufacturing Effluent Management. And that in the end means that we as pharmaceutical industry developed measures to collate data relevant to then derive thresholds specific for each active pharmaceutical ingredient at the manufacturing plant, so at each company and each manufacturing site, And that enables then the companies, first of all, to understand where the threshold, the safe threshold for an API is, then to conduct monitoring, and in the end, of course, to understand if there are any exceedances, and if there are exceedances, to take measures. That is one of the examples. Then second is that we proactively again provided a scheme to improve the environmental risk assessment for pharmaceuticals. And that is because we as industry felt that the environmental risk assessment as existing at this point and still today is not sufficient. It's not addressing the needs anymore, where we see that pharmaceuticals are of raising concern in the environment. So we developed concepts how to, for example, improve the era as such. Also, how to handle legacy products, which means products marketed before 2006, because in 2006, from that year on, we only had a guideline to run environmental risk assessments, and basically products marketed before were out of scope. And this is a high number of medicinal products, and we thought and felt that this is not acceptable anymore. We also suggested that APIs should, that errors should be based on API level, so substance level, not on product level, as is currently done, because in the end you want to know how many of a substance, what amount is, or what concentration is there for all products and not for one product. And also avoidance of multiplication of studies, because at that point you have to run studies for an API. If it's in 10 products, then you have to run 10 times the same studies. Doesn't make a lot of sense in our view. Last point here, and I really want to point to this project. It's an IMI project, which is an acronym for the Innovative Medicines Initiative. And these are projects co-funded, so public-private partnership co-funded by the EU Commission and industry. And then you have a lot of public partners in it. You have industry representatives. You also have authorities in it. In our case, the European Medicines Agency. And what we do in this, really, I really think it's a great project, is we build first time a public accessible API error database in the EU, because there is no such database there. And access to environmental data is really difficult in the EU still. Hopefully we will be able to go live within the next few months. And yeah, that I think this is a great progress, also important for the goals you have defined. Also quickly mentioning, we are in that project featuring concepts for greener APIs and other more, but I will not dive into that deeper because we don't have the time. So last slide, second question, how could the pharmaceutical sector support the implementation of the BASP and the upcoming action plan on hazardous substances? Well, first of all, I want to highlight that our companies are already working following best available techniques, which means minimization of emissions. That together with our partners, FPR is already raising awareness about pharmaceuticals in the environment and promotes proper disposal practices. And I provided here a link which you stakeholders can use to inform for their specific country how to handle waste, medicinal products waste. It was mentioned 2 talks before that we now have the wastewater treatment directive in place. And yes, there is some debate on how it is implemented, but we as FPR clearly support the polluter pays principle and the implementation of a quaternary treatment, while we say it must be a fair process and a fair cost sharing, which at this point is not the case. And we can dive deeper if there's time or interest later, maybe. And then just mentioning that also, again, in the IMI Premier project, we are developing tools, novel tools to assess emissions and effects of pharmaceuticals in the environment. And closing with saying again that we as FPR, as the association, are open for exchange with stakeholders such as you to make progress in PI-related issues. And that's it.
Thank you, Jan, for your presentation. And I see in this comment section that there are more comments and you're sharing already some tools for guidance, but I don't see any question right now to you, Jan, or other your colleagues that were presenting the things shortly before. Anyway, it means that we continue our work and we are moving to the group discussion. And as I mentioned before, this group discussion will focus more on building a One Baltic vision. And for that, we will have 6 breakout groups, and the topics are linked to the presentations that you have heard so far. And the discussion will be led by HELCOM staff who already presented today all these topics. So let me fast go through these topics. The first group will be talking about municipal wastewater treatment, and we'll discuss the implementation of the new EU Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive and the planned revision of HELCOM recommendation on municipal wastewater treatment. The second group will be talking about the filling key knowledge gaps and uncertainties, and is resolving uncertainties that were discovered in the process of deciding on HELCOM priority substances. The third group, so far as I know, is the smallest right now. So if you have an interest in it, please join. Individuals and small businesses. We'll talk about good practice and awareness, and we'll talk more about local level and how the related Baltic Sea Action Plan activities could be best implemented. Also, other group will be discussing offshore maritime activities, and the focus will be related to noxious liquid substances in cargo tank washing waters, as well as biofouling and anti-fouling. One more group will be focusing on industrial products and processes, and in this group, it's stakeholders' contribution on implementation reduction of release from industrial processes and from the life cycle of industrial products. And the last group will be focusing on pharmaceuticals, and we'll discuss reducing the emission of pharmaceuticals and how different stakeholders can support this work. The discussions will take place here on Teams in these breakout rooms, and it will work very easily. So if you have chosen your breakout group already before this conference started, then you will be moved there automatically. You don't need to do anything. But if you have not chosen your group, you have the opportunity to do it right now. And you can see the guidance on the screen, what you should type and do if you want to choose the group. So if you have difficulties to get to your rooms, please let us know that in the chat, and HELCOM team will help you with this. You just need to write here in this pop-up the view rooms, click on view rooms and click join, which one you would like to join. And after these group discussions, there will be short coffee break at the end of that. So we are waiting you back here for the closing session. Let's call it like this. We will wrap up today's conference, and also there will be a few takeaway messages to share with you. So we are all waiting you back at 10 minutes to 3. In case some of you won't attend these group discussions, please be back at 10 minutes to 3 when we will close today's conference. So I wish you all the best and good luck in these discussions, and see you in almost an hour. Thank you. So welcome back. I hope you hear me well, and I hope you enjoyed also a short coffee break. And as far as I saw, the group discussions went really smooth and very actively. You were taking part in them, either talking to the challenges or really showing the concrete examples on opportunities. And also I heard quite interesting discussions that you had about the more pressing gaps in knowledge that actually need to be solved, so we can find the best solution to find the best actions for having our main target, so we can reach our main target to have a healthy and clean Baltic Sea. So now I would like to invite all moderators of these group discussions to share what you have heard, what you have discussed, and what are your results from your group. And in the coming almost an hour, we will hear results from each group by Markus, Owen, Susanna, Marta, Vasilis, and Lotta. If you are all here, please let me know that. Markus, are you ready to start?
Yes, I do hope so. So thankfully or unthankfully, I'm the first one, which means that I've almost had no time to really gather my thoughts. We just stopped our discussion in the breakout room. But I'll quickly try to say what we saw there. So our group was about the municipal wastewater treatment. We had a very large variety of different stakeholders. And although we weren't many, we did represent quite a nice selection of different countries around the Baltic Sea area. We looked into mostly the new Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and we discussed and voted on the different aspects of how well people know what's going to be up with the new Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and let's say where the money is coming from. And as you can see, the legal aspects were the highest voted of like clarity and we know what's going on. And of course, the financial aspects are the most like unclear. We also discussed a bit about how HELCOM could support the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, both on what kind of activities would need support. And of course, then I'll skip a bit how exactly we could support them. So the top two answers from our stakeholders were that at the regional level, we could try to do intensive information campaigns based on latest scientific data to combat this lack of clarity, not only for wastewater treatment plants, but also to the civil society, because as we discussed in our talks, no matter how we will implement polluter pays principle, in the end, it will always be the consumer who pays the price. It's just the question of whether it's going to be directly by paying for your wastewater treatment or indirectly by paying larger sums of money for all your cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. But it will always come down to the person themselves. And therefore, it would be needed for people to understand why we are doing this. And the second most popular vote was that we should focus on creating regional guidance on this risk assessment for smaller wastewater treatment plants. So according to the new treatment directive, there will be a second wave of updates to smaller wastewater treatment plants, and the need for which ones are going to be updated are supposed to be clarified by a risk assessment. And we see that this is something we should help our stakeholders with. And I would also want to highlight that the least supported activity was to push countries to upgrade their wastewater treatment plants as fast as possible. So this is something we should maybe keep in mind. And I'll maybe skip a few parts here. We also had a big question on how we should update the new HELCOM recommendations on municipal wastewater treatment and what to prioritize. And the three highest answers here were that not only looking into hazardous substances, wastewater treatment plants and the recommendation update should focus on a holistic approach. So also look into the energy and climate feasibility of whatever we are doing and proposing. And this also goes together well with the second response that got a lot of votes, that anything that is recommended should be cost efficient and not just recommended by some unclear reasonings. And we should focus on our money into the things we can actually successfully do. And the third most popular answer, or equally popular answer would be correct to say here, was that we should keep the ambition level the same as EU directive, but just have more support. And this was the main basis from our discussions. We also had very good smaller discussions on nature-based solutions and how to actually start implementing them. And I really want to thank my very active small group of participants in the breakout room.
Thank you, Markus. And thank you, all your participants. The next group, I think we could ask to tell us more what you were talking about the knowledge gaps and uncertainties. So, Owen, are you ready?
Thanks, Sandra. Yes, I will share my screen. Yep. So we had a relatively small group as well. There was, I think, 10 or 12 of us in the group. And we focused, the people's backgrounds or focus areas. There was an interest on PFAS from a cluster of people, and then also some people working on governance aspects, and also then linking between policy and governance in the group as well, and also some expertise on pharmaceuticals. The second question, sorry, let me just move this along. The second question we looked at then was if we believe there's enough information ready to make a start. And you can see from this screen here on question 3, most people were placing their sticky notes towards the side, basically saying we already have enough information, and in some cases we have more than enough, heading towards the aspect that we have more than enough information to make a start on actions and measures. So we have enough background information, but then there's also the identification here. For instance, more information on PFAS in fish, and then also more information on the sources and the breakdown or the destruction and recycling of PFAS is also relevant to continue gathering information on, so we can improve, hopefully, the actions that we make. We also then looked at some of the more pressing issues and knowledge gaps. I'll make that a little bit bigger. So there was some information here then on being more need to focus on science policy communication is important to sort of bring the messages to the right places and to the right communities. So looking back then at some of these issues of identifying some of the new issues and keeping abreast of what's coming in the future, or what's going to develop into a problem, rather than having too strong a focus on the substances that we already know a lot about, is also something to maintain and make sure we fill the knowledge gaps and keep abreast of that issue. There's also then making sure that sort of substitution of chemicals is there's a good procedure and a good way that the potential harm from substances is already well covered and well documented before they're introduced into the environment. Looking at these cumulative effects and societal costs related to pollution is also important, similar to what Marcus just touched on. And then also looking at good sort of practical methods for how to implement the polluter pays principles, rather than just having it as a principle, but actually look at real pragmatic ways in which it can be utilized to achieve good progress. When we looked at then some sort of practical terms, how we can try and fill some of these gaps, there was a nice comment that HELCOM, don't underestimate HELCOM, it can really influence EU policies and global policies, as well as vice versa. So it's sort of keep on the regional work. And there's also this aspect of linking back to communication as well, then, to help bridge this research and policy making and politicians. And we also need to keep engaging with projects, but keep engaging with this community, and these sorts of webinars are actually quite useful. And then again, looking at the environmental costs and bringing this more into the discussion is also key to help catalyze action, as well as use of the knowledge that's already known and generated. Looking at the if there's any sort of key stakeholders we're missing, then there's an element of next generation interaction that was lifted here, but then also then strengthening the links with the chemical industry and with municipalities, for instance, for stormwater or wastewater treatment plant, and sort of building on the interactions we've got from this conference would be good for the future and good for implementation. And then we looked very quickly at if there's sort of other issues that would be good to know more, and then how to interact with the general public and increase like a societal motivation or pressure towards having good status is also something that would be positive to explore further. And then some more specific things related to the fact that biofouling and recreational boating and the use of copper in there, this would be a good thing to dig further into. And it was noted that in aquaculture, then Norway has recently used a ban on copper, and it's had significant effects. And that's the summary of what we discussed. Thank you.
The third group in which you talked a lot about good examples and also awareness raising is group where Susanna was moderating. And Susanna, if you're ready, please tell us more about what you discussed in individuals and small business group today.
Yes, I will share my screen. I see from the chat that some people had problems with seeing the screen, so I hope you can see what I'm sharing now. Okay. Yeah, we also had I think we are our group is even smaller than the ones previously mentioned groups, but we had a very nice and active discussion. We started, indeed, our topic was individuals, small businesses, municipalities, kind of awareness raising, and what could be done with these stakeholders. And we started with the question on what are the challenges and opportunities to reduce emissions of hazardous substances from private households, municipal entities, and small businesses in the region. We found many challenges. First of all, the lack of knowledge from these stakeholders. There are so many substances, and if even the scientists are struggling with them, how could the general public or the small businesses or the municipal entities know about them? And then that there's also a lack of prioritization of the problem. Of course, there are many other environmental issues or other issues, economic issues that often take priority from hazardous substances. And then about regarding municipalities, it's a very complex challenge requiring a holistic approach. Municipalities need to establish a dialogue with many different stakeholders known to them and engage them. So it's very complex, and municipalities might not have, especially smaller ones, might not have resources for this kind of work. Then we talk about some structural problems, the fact that, for example, for eutrophication, for public awareness, everyone can see in the shores that there are this blue-green algae. But if you need to raise awareness of hazardous substances in the Baltic Sea, for example, it's not so easy to see than the eutrophication problem. This could be a problem, or then there can be some mixed messages, for example, that fish is healthy, but it still has hazardous substances, so it might be confusing for the general public. And then a bit maybe depressing message that the more you know about hazardous substances, the more hopeless it might seem for the normal normal person. So it might be quite a tricky challenge. But we still found some opportunities. For example, an enhanced dialogue in the regional level, which we are having also, of course, right now. The fact that the hazardous substances, the environmental issues are often coupled with human health and well-being issues. So this might be this could be an opportunity to promote this issue. Then that there are these kind of solutions for consumers, like apps for consumers, for example, for cosmetics to search for the ones that are less harmful. And then cross-sectoral discussion in the municipal level. And then, although it was said that this is not the best solution, but still, of course, there are these new requirements for wastewater treatment plants, and maybe they will take care of part of the problem that it would otherwise be a problem for the private households and so forth. And then we discussed best ways to raise awareness for these groups, and we found several possibilities. Well, these information campaigns that they're quite, of course, already done, but they could be quite effective. If you're on your way to work in the subway, you see an ad on that you shouldn't flush your your medicine down the toilet. So then it's can be quite effective and reach a lot of people, or then have these on YouTube as ads, for example. And then it's important to engage with local communities, raise awareness, for example, churches, schools, and kindergartens. Then also newspaper articles. And then in the Empress project, there has been this risk assessment tools for cities, and they are similar from other projects as well. This could help the municipalities. And then we talked that for consumers, if there would be better labeling, warning or eco-labeling, that would really take into account the hazardous substances aspects. So this could really help in choosing between different products, what to use in your house. And then one option for workplaces could be this kind of different kind of competitions, like there are for climate action, for example. There could be some competition to take on hazardous substances as well. Then we talked about important stakeholders groups to involve in the work, and we identified consumer organizations and NGOs and environmental NGOs, scientists and municipal departments, of course, and schools, and industries and businesses as well. And then finally, we discussed how could stakeholders help in reducing emissions from private households, municipalities, and small businesses, and support the implementation of the PSAP and the new regional action plan on hazardous substances. And of course, as it was the topic, of course, this awareness raising is very important, and also different NGOs, for example, can help pushing for strong implementation by the countries. Then we talk about that if we want to involve the consumers, it's really important that the measures are easy for them to implement. And then thought about more variety of eco-friendly products with clear eco-labeling, and then creating incentives and motivation to choose ecologically better products, and then that this awareness raising should happen at an early stage. So again, the important roles of schools, etc. So that was a short summary of our discussion, and if the group members have any comments, I think they can post in the chat any further comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Susanna. Yes, if group members want to comment something, please feel free to do it. Also, if you have questions from one group to another, please use the opportunity. We still have time for that. But now from individual level, let's go for industry level, and we'll talk more about offshore and maritime activities first. And that's why I would like to ask Marta to tell us more what you were discussing in your group, and what is the outcome of your discussion?
Thank you very much, Sandra. So first of all,
thank you.
First of all, thank you to our group. I think it was one of the most populated one, and we have representatives from all the stakeholders involved, except from local authorities. We have national administrations from Finland, Germany, Poland, and Sweden. And then we have the industry from CLIA, research institutions from the Finnish Meteorological Institute. And then we have 3 NGOs present. We have the John Norman's Foundation, we have Sea Alarm, and we also have WWF. And we also have the environmental consultant and chief inspectorate for environmental protection. So coming to the substance, we have 2 topics. I will talk to you about cargo tank washing waters. And first of all, we talk about which stakeholders should be involved in this process, which is connected to Action S16, which was presented earlier today. And it was quite a lot of agreement that this is a complicated topic, and therefore having all stakeholders involved on board is extremely relevant. And at international level, the International Maritime Organization was referred to. Then at European level, there was a connection made to the Port Reception Facilities Directive. Then we also jumped into national authorities. And not only national authorities, but we also touched upon the chemical tankers operators and tank washing companies. And of course, at national level, how to implement this work is extremely relevant. We also mentioned the role of NGOs, and also a very interesting issue raised was about wildlife organizations in connection with potentially polluted animals from discharges of this type of residues. And of course, we recognize the work of researchers and ports, and the ports is also in connection with the Port Reception Facilities Directive. Then the second question we addressed was how can we engage these stakeholders to contribute effectively so that by 2026 we have the impact assessments and the implementation of any measures conducted afterwards. And for this, if you recall that John Durmany Foundation was mentioning the international project about the tanker project, this was mentioned as one of the tools to utilize so that countries could utilize to achieve the first part of this action, S16. And there was a request made to improve the communication between the governance network. We came back to IMO in relation to implementation of stricter regulations, and also to increase the fees from the local authorities. And it was also pointed out even that we may need to go to the ban of pre-wash at all. It was also mentioned that we need to have national authorities involved so that stakeholders are encouraged to implement measures considered. Also in relation to IMO, it was the proposal to add more chemicals under the category X and category Y to the registry. And then regarding wildlife that we were discussing also at the stakeholders identified, we said that we should provide data to identify whether this is an issue or if that's not the case, because there's a lack of information at this moment in time. And again, communication was identified as a key issue that needs to be further improved. And this is also the issue of contingency planning was mentioned. It's like who is to do what and who needs to get all the information. And also the case that happened a couple of months ago in Hanko in Finland was used as an example of how to learn and improve things for the future to come. And then we moved to another question, which was about what key information is currently missing about the volumes and impacts of cargo tank washing discharges, and how can we collect or share this data before the 2026 impact assessment. And the issue about data not being open was raised, and it is understandable that sometimes is because it is confidential, but still there is a need to know about the amount of illegal undestructible discharges. So because once we know where we are heading, then we will be able to conduct an impact assessment. When it comes to impact assessments, it was suggested that this topic is addressed within the HELCOM expert group on wildlife. So this is something that can be further investigated. For tracking the spills, it was suggested that we need to continue working on improvement of the models, maybe utilize AIS data, and also try to go for. Sorry, this has been changed.
I'm sorry.
Can you go back to the other one? Thank you. Sorry, here. And so what else? Yes, modeling was suggested as a tool that should be improved. And for that, we said that needs not only AIS, but satellite data as well, and artificial intelligence could be utilized here. And this could also help to know about the biological effects, and of course, linked to monitoring activities. The last question of this topic was about what regional actions could the Baltic Sea region take after the 2026 assessment to further limit the discharges from cargo tank washing, and how these efforts should be aligned with the work that is being conducted at IMO level. And then for this topic, it was encouraged to work together with ship owners to find out what problems do they have, And then once this is figured out, to try to sort them out. Also, we need to work with ports to ensure port processing facilities are sufficient. And also, this is also linked to the fees. The last point was that it was indicated that ensuring that tank washing and living washing water on shore is easy and not too expensive. That could increase the appropriate discharge of this wash. And then there was also, in reference to IMORC, to initiate discussions to designate the Baltic Sea as a special area under MARPOL Annex 2. About reporting requirements, it was emphasized that there is a need to do that, and linked to that, we need more inspections and more open data. And also, it was suggested to ban the en route discharge of this type of washing waters. And then, if you allow me, I would hand it over to Gaston to continue with the biofouling issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Next group about industrial products and processes we're talking. And in this group, I know that Vasilis was the main person who can now tell us more. What are the topics you were discussing there?
First, maybe a clarification. Does the previous group want to, maybe, I think there was one more question that Gaston would complement Marta's feedback, just to clarify before I start, maybe.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, the remaining questions were related to biofouling. And so the questions were, how can we ensure widespread adoption and effective implementation of the guidance? And in this case, communication and more information to stakeholders was highlighted. And also there was a proposal to create a baseline questionnaire to follow boaters over the years in what practices they follow. And then when we ask about other regulations that are not related with IMO in managing anti-fouling and biofouling, there was proposed to encourage manual cleaning in marinas and monitor more compounds and follow common requirements for in-water cleaning. And then we ask what else shall be done to minimize the release of biocides. And there was this suggestion to align recommendation HL13 to EU frameworks, and also enable in-water cleaning by agreements on common risk assessment. And finally, other additional comments on the topic that should be considered. There were these three suggestions, one focusing on the research on biofouling for liquefied natural gas, and then develop a strategy on how to remove dump munitions from the Baltic Sea, and finally management of grey water discharge also from the platforms. So that would be the summary of this breakout group, and then I can hand it over to Vasilis. Thank you.
Thank you now, Vasilis. Sorry, now the floor is yours, and we're ready to listen to your group summary.
So yes, as Sandra said, so that's the group about industrial products and processes. So let me also share my screen. So we're a quite small group, but still quite diverse in terms of types of stakeholders represented. We had national and local authorities, also Swedish Transport Agency, a representative from industry, as well as NGO representatives. Before we start the discussion about stakeholders, different stakeholders and what they can do, what could be in their role that they could do better in promoting substitution or reduction of emissions, and for instance, what is the best role the authorities can play this came also to different options that HELCOM is currently considering for options. We had a look if there was a specific experience or knowledge or interest about some of the relevant for this topic substances in the HELCOM list of priority substances. And that proved to be cadmium in relation to cadmium levels in imported phosphate rock from sedimentary bases. Some interesting also on copper and antifouling compounds, which of course has links to the maritime industry as well, and also the PFAS and the interest based on the recent and NGOs report highlighting the issue with the foam. So still, the discussion we had then was at the generic level. We did not focus on a specific substance, but it was very good that participants shared the experience they had and some views on what could work better. So on then what stakeholders could do better and which stakeholders, there was a view that's supported by quite some of the participants that it's rather producers' responsibility to ensure that they do not use or not incorporate hazardous chemicals in the products they make or in their processes, rather than for the professional or consumer users who could potentially adopt their purchasing strategies to take some action. So from this perspective, producers' responsibility was seen as more critical here. And the question there, of course, was how could the situation be improved? So on one hand, there are the options of having stricter or more regulatory requirements, listing substances in a regulatory list, for example, if they're not listed already, or having more effective enforcement activities by authorities. And actually, that could cover even areas where there's currently, we're aware that there is currently lack of appropriate enforcement, such as products coming from outside Europe, including via online sales. But on the other hand, the alternative would be that states could support companies to substitute, provide incentives, etc. Then there are also, of course, technical possibilities focusing on the safety data sheets and labeling and what can be done there better, again, including also imported articles. And of course, awareness raising, for example, by NGOs can also play a role there. The discussion, of course, then focused on the dilemma or what is really more effective way to make a difference. Is the way forward to focus more on regulatory measures or voluntary measures? For instance, that's one of the ideas that currently are explored towards the regional action plan of hazardous substances, where there for substances which appear to be problematic for the Baltic Sea, but they are not yet included in the regulatory lists, in REACH regulation, for example, where there, and this could take a lot of time, of course, until this happens, where there communication with relevant stakeholders, such as manufacturers and importers of the chemicals, or even downstream users who have the option on which chemicals to use for their products. So there are considerations whether this communication with those stakeholders could promote voluntary measures towards substitution or better risk assessment by manufacturers and importers in the REACH registrations. Because, of course, even for substances which are not specifically listed in legislation, there are those generic requirements, but it's not necessarily so that they are fulfilled always by the companies. So on one hand, then the participants reflect experience, for example, by NGO, that although they had experience in the past by trying to promote these voluntary measures, the feeling they had, or what actually happened, is that the companies, by looking the increased cost that substitution would come up with, or the increased cost of implementing some technology to reduce emissions would result in a competitive disadvantage. So they felt that companies were unlikely to take any measures unless there was some regulation requiring them to do. On the other hand, there was also experience reflected by an industry representative that there is still a space for such voluntary actions, and there are advantages for industry by using environmentally safer techniques or substances. And actually, it might depend on the case. For instance, when some alternative has been already in use and is implemented, there is experience that the companies who implement it may have the will to promote those safer substance or best available techniques and take some initiatives in this respect. So one possible conclusion is that maybe parallel modes of actions are needed there. So looking at the legislation, but also looking at other means. I think that's the more or less the summary of the group. Of course, members of the group can correct me or complement. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasily. If someone wants to add something, please right now. And otherwise, we move to the last group about pharmaceuticals you were discussing. And Lotta, I could ask you to maybe tell us more and give us the conclusion, what were discussed in your group.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to share in Teams. No, it doesn't work. I will have to share differently. Just a moment. Now it's loading. So we had also a nice group discussing the pharmaceuticals. And first of all, which stakeholders were represented. Actually, at this point, we were not having all the groups participants yet there. But anyway, you can see here that we have a nice share of different kinds of stakeholders represented in the group, from national and local authorities to industry research and civil society. And first, we just shared what kind of fields of interest or work people are working with. And it was also a wide range from monitoring to regulation, wastewater to ecotoxicology, and One Health approach, antimicrobial resistance, and so on. The first actual question that we discussed in Miro was similar to some other groups. So what are the challenges and opportunities to reduce emissions of pharmaceuticals in the region? It's still loading, but I can maybe pick. I won't show you in details, but it's the red and green sticky notes to the left. So, for example, it was raised that awareness raising is still important to consumers on what not to flush. And there have been several national awareness raising campaigns related to this in different countries. But then there was a good example of engaging pharmacies to actually not only taking old medicine back free of charge, but also giving, for example, discount on new purchases if you bring some of your old medication back. It was brought up that there are also many households that are not connected to wastewater treatment plants, and that might be a challenge also in all countries to some extent. And in general, that actually there are different levels of challenges, and the lack of knowledge or gaps are represented in different levels. First of which is the level of if there are thresholds or PNEC values for substances or they are metabolites, then even though there would be, the second challenge is maybe not knowing or having gaps in information on environmental concentrations or levels of those substances. And the third level is on what happens if there are exceedances. So many different challenges, but then there were also opportunities, the green ones here. So for example, looking towards the future, because of course pharmaceuticals are medicine that the patients need. So maybe in general, new products are more environmentally friendly. And of course, it's necessary also to improve, for example, the wastewater treatment plants and so on. But it was mentioned that it would be important to have this one substance, one approach management applied so that there wouldn't be many thresholds for different fields of use and for different parts of the environment. So because it's then very confusing to have for different sectors very different thresholds. Of course, they are also usually there is a background why is it so, and also that there are not so many EQS values, environmental quality standards for pharmaceuticals, and there are also many lacking. As a good example or proposal how to proceed also in the opportunities side, it was mentioned that of course there should be collaboration between the academia and authorities and industries so that the future pharmacists, for example, are trained to be aware of the environmental aspects of pharmaceuticals and how to make better choices when they then later on conduct their work. And then we ranked the stakeholders that would be most important to involve in this work. And both national and local authorities came out on top, but also research and industry. So it's interesting to note that it's still seen that it's the authorities that were seen in our group as the most important to actually kind of lead the way for with industry and research to other stakeholders. And then again, we had a Miro task to actually think about how could these stakeholders help and which stakeholders could do that, how, when implementing the both existing Baltic Sea Action Plan actions and the upcoming RAP has actions, and these are now the blue ones here to the right. And I try to zoom in a bit to show some of these. So it was pointed out, for example, that it's important to understand which substances are harmful, and then there's research needs in general, but then also that there should be still, as mentioned earlier in the challenges and opportunities part, that awareness raising both for consumers, but for example also municipal users or industries would be needed. It would be needed to share whatever data and databases we have. It would be important to have them in jointly used to actually then develop, for example, new standard values and so on, and also to finance not only developing of better opportunities, but monitoring and screening to have the information of what is there in the environment. Of course, it was mentioned again here that the implementation of the new Urban Wastewater Directive is important, but then also it was discussed how to actually do that in a way that it's also covers different size groups, is you know the fair sharing of costs and so on. And I think this was the last part of our group's discussions, and the group members are welcome to add if I missed something. Thanks.
Thank you, Lotta. I don't know if group members are now trying to add something to your presentation. But Lotta, may I ask you maybe to give some reflection and also the wrap up of all day, what has been done today. And we actually managed to squeeze in less than 6 hours, quite a huge topic. And maybe there are takeaway messages that you can share with us right now, not only about your group, but this conference in general.
Yes, thank you very much. And well, dear participants, I just want to express my thanks to all of you for participating to this year's HELCOM Stakeholder Conference and having contributed the whole long day. 2 years ago, during the UN Water Conference in New York in March 2023, HELCOM committed among its 3 water action agenda commitments to develop this regional strategic approach for managing hazardous substances. As you know, in line with implementing the Baltic Sea Action Plan, Action HL1, and also supporting implementation of the several other related actions related to mechanism for priority substances list utilization, information of other policies, and also to influence these other policies, both wider in the Europe and globally. And now, after 2.5 years of hard work led by the regional experts from the countries around the sea, in the HELCOM expert group on hazardous substances and the working group on source-to-sea management of nutrients, hazardous substances, and sustainable agricultural practices, done on the grassroots level to a large extent by my dear colleagues at the Secretariat, who are top experts in the field, working here in Helsinki, who developed and tested the approach, gathered and analyzed huge amounts of data when building up this system. So we are now here, we are having the new strategic approach. And as you know, the first outcomes don't include only the approach itself and the tools within it, but also we did the test run with it. And now we also have the new HELCOM recommendation on list of priority substances, sources of releases, and uncertainties to address. And additionally, I don't know if you had a chance yet to check on our HELCOM website, but we have also published these thorough fact sheets on all these priority substances and substances of concern on HELCOM website. However, as was the aim of today, there is still a lot of work to be done, and the focus has been on discussing how the existing and the new regional actions and measures that are being drafted could be best implemented. And there, you, as important stakeholders in the region, have provided invaluable input, as we just heard from the breakout group discussions. Also, some other Baltic Sea Action Plan actions have already been at least partially implemented within the processes and projects in a couple of recent years. But still, there are many that need to be implemented. And then, of course, these whole new regional actions and the regional action plan we have to actually finalize during this year. So maybe just some things I took from the group discussions. So from the wastewater treatment perspective, it was considered important to have a holistic approach, especially when revising the HELCOM recommendation on urban wastewater treatment to have this circularity, not only on hazardous substances point of view, but also on energy and nutrients, so that will be needed to be kept in mind. Then about knowledge gaps and uncertainties, it was mentioned that there is already enough information to implement measures and plan new ones. And I think it was very good to hear that not to underestimate HELCOM in influencing also other policies, and then that it will be important to share information not only on environmental, for example, levels or creating new thresholds, but also on costs of different both measures and the deteriorating of the environment. Then regarding the households, small businesses and municipal entities, it was mentioned that prioritizing hazardous substances, for example, over economic aspects, as it is a complex challenge with mixing information is needed. But then it could be done with enhanced dialogue between stakeholders and coupling well-being and health, using eco-labels as it's done already now, and info campaigns. It was mentioned that there are new risk assessment tools developed for municipalities, and there could be even very innovative approaches like competitions and so on used. For the offshore and maritime, I took from the group discussions that for example, the tank washing action needs many stakeholders to be actually implemented, and both national and IMO level regulations and feeds should be used. There should be open data and modeling. Collaboration with ports and ship owners is of course needed, and then, for example, inspections for that the stakeholders are actually also implementing the regulations. And then on biofouling, there came another stakeholder group, for example, boat owners. Then for industries, some substances or substance groups were mentioned: PFAS, cadmium, copper, and producers' responsibility. Also here it was mentioned that it's important to better enforce the existing regulation, and that maybe mandatory labeling and incentives for better choices could be also related to having the measures implemented. I won't state again what I said about the pharmaceuticals group, but we also had good discussions and a lot of stakeholders involved there. So all in all, in the beginning we heard or we had a guidance on keeping a curious and open mind and listening to each other. And what I have heard, I think we achieved that and much more. So I just want to thank you once more very much. We will utilize everything you have proposed and shared with us today in the breakout groups, and we have been making notes. So let's meet again in future parts of this process when we are developing the regional action plan further. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lotta, and thank you all to participate so actively in discussions and also in this conference. As we heard, the concrete steps will follow, and there were really plenty of very useful information and ideas exchanged today that will lead us to our main target, to have Baltic Sea less affected from these hazardous substances. As I already said at the very beginning of the conference, that this was all recorded and it will be used later, so you can watch it on our YouTube channel, and you will receive this recording and link to this recording in the next coming days in your email, as well with the publications and resources that have been mentioned during this conference. So all the materials will be delivered to your emails. One more remark from my side is to please fill in very short, really short feedback survey that you can find here. The link is in our chat, and also you will of course have it in your emails, but maybe don't leave it for tomorrow or later. It is really very, very short, and it will help to improve and plan our future stakeholder conferences. So please be active also in this. Otherwise, I wish you all the best and good luck with this One Baltic approach to really reach our targets and have our Baltic Sea in a very good environmental state. As I wish you all good afternoon, and see you in some other event, and see you next year in the Stakeholder Conference 2026. Thank you and goodbye.